my favorite movie of 2019 was The Lighthouse by Robert Eggers, starring Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it.
Robert Pattinson is drunk again, and he says something like, "You smell like curdled foreskin."
Yes.
Or something like that. That's brilliant. That is brilliant.
Why'd you spill your beans? Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of the Watchlist Podcast. My name is Jacob Boyer. I'm joined by my co-host, Devon Nowark.
How you doing?
We're here to discuss movies with you, fine people.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
You forgot why we're doing this? All right, so, speaking of which, why are we doing this? So, my main reason for wanting to do a movie podcast is I have, for those of you who are fans of my channel, I had a show for a while where I would recommend, like, it would be a monthly series, and I'd recommend, like, 10 movies a month. I had this, like, really jilted, terrible script I would read from, and I'd show a clip of the movie. And that gets flagged by copyright all the time, and there's no way you can really, you can fight it a little bit, but there's no way to get 100% of your video cleared, because there's so many bad corporations out there that are trying to abuse copyright.
Even though there's fair use for review,
exactly.
You still can't.
They
still win half the time. More than half the time they win.
Right. So it was a combination of that, and I just hate the sound of my own voice when I'm rigidly reading off a script. So I thought that doing the podcast format would make it a little bit more freeform and a little bit more engaging. So.
And this way you get two movie nerds bouncing stuff off of each other instead of just one, you know?
You're not listening to one give his jaded opinions on art house flicks and why Hollywood is terrible.
You get another one to keep him grounded, you know?
Exactly.
You start to sound like a pretentious movie critic after a while. You get the other guy that could be like, hey, come back a little bit. Bring it back.
So I guess we should give a little bit of background. We both went to Kutztown University for sort of their film program, met each other in like fundamentals of video production, did a few projects together, and then kind of went our separate ways a little bit, but we always kind of kept in touch whenever it was like, oh man, have you seen this movie that came out? So it felt natural, I think, to get this started off with you as a co-host.
Absolutely, and I think the dynamic will prove to be a good dynamic.
Definitely. If any of you have seen Ted and Tanner talk titles, very on par with that.
That is a very obscure reference.
Very, very obscure. I'll link to it in the description.
There might be 3 people on Earth.
Exactly.
Get that.
Exactly. So, yeah, that sort of moves, that we got the introductions out of the way.
Well, I guess, like you said, yeah, I went to Kutztown as well. But we both sort of aspirations to be, like many other people out there, I'm sure, they aspire to eventually one day work in the entertainment film sort of industry, and this is one way to at least sort of get your opinions out there and sort of get the ball rolling, get some conversations going about your topics and hot takes on things. So
exactly,
I'm excited to get it going.
All right. Well, speaking of hot takes, one other thing I thought that would be a good getting to know you type thing, so anyone out there who's maybe not 100% familiar with my channel or isn't familiar with you at all, is we could just, very basic, just every movie nerd has a couple favorite movies of all time. So, Devon, what are your favorite movies?
Oh, man. So, I'm sure I went off on a tangent about this for you before, but to me, the question is kind of a dichotomy of between movies that you think are technically good and movies that you really enjoy on a personal level. And I don't know, I sort of have these theories that everybody has these movies, because we live in a movie culture society now. We were born into it, so everybody's got these movies that they've seen from childhood, where they almost have let's say an unfair bias towards them just because they saw them when they were little. Like, for example, this is by no means an answer to your question, but you remember the film Godzilla, which came out in '98,
yeah,
I think,
yeah.
The American one by Roland Emmerich with Matthew Broderick in it.
Yes, yeah.
That was a movie that I loved as a kid, and I would always say something like that. And it was basically off of Jurassic Park hype. I would love Jurassic Park when I was a kid, and then I saw the trailer for this movie, and I'm like, Mom, there's dinosaurs in this one too. The one dinosaur's as big as a city. It's crazy. So we see something like that, and then years later you go back and watch it, and it's like atrocious, and you're like, wow, the effects are terrible, and Matthew Broderick is nice. Ferris Bueller, what are you doing in this?
Exactly.
So that's really like there's like an interesting dichotomy there, which I think as somebody who like comes up with ideas for movies, that's an interesting to look for. So something that would be like a technically good movie for me, like I feel like people like to be right, and if you're gonna ask me what my favorite movie of all time is, I'm gonna tell you what I think the best movie of all time is, and that would be 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Okay.
Just the scope of that movie, the transitions, the symbolism, I guess, of the man working with tools, and then in the next shot, the tools have helped him got to space, and then the whole tale of, and now the tools are working against you. You're talking about the robots being the tools. You got HAL 9000 working against you, and it's just a very existential film to me. Like, to me, that's the kind of movie you could show to an alien who doesn't even know anything about humans really, and they could almost get the picture.
Exactly. Or they would say, hey, that's all wrong. We don't do things like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they could, yeah, exactly. But that just on a cosmic sort of scale, that is what I would consider the greatest movie of all time almost, just
okay.
And then I already mentioned Jurassic Park being one of my favorites when I was a kid. In terms of entertainment value, I think that movie really delivers on what people want out of an action adventure sort of movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Spielberg always delivers on that sort of thing. Like, I just watched Indiana Jones movies recently too, and it's almost like serial entertainment. Like,
right.
There was a part in Indiana Jones, the first one, where they literally, like, it's right before the big car chase with Indy and the Nazis and the Ark, and like he just goes over to I'm blanking on his name, John Rhys Davies. He goes over to John Rhys Davies and he's like, they went that way, and like they have a 2-second conversation, and then boom, another action scene. Like, it's just entertainment after entertainment after entertainment. And people say about Jurassic Park, they say the characters weren't that great, but everybody remembers Dr. Malcolm.
Exactly.
And the humans weren't even really the star of the movie. That's the other thing that I like about it on a cosmic sort of scale, is that dinosaurs aren't dragons. They're not made up. Dinosaurs really existed, and then like to bring something that really existed all the way back in and then tell a story with it is really interesting to me.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah, that was one of the first movies too. I remember because from a young age I was always like, I want to watch a movie. Like, I think my grandma had this book of like kids say the darndest things. Of like whenever we would say something funny, like me and my siblings. She would like write it down, and like a recurring thing in that book was me saying, hey, let's go watch a movie. So I have that going for me. But the first one that I remember being like, oh man, movies are awesome, is Jurassic Park, when my dad showed that to me at a young age. That was the first time where I ever like tried to figure out like how they worked, like watching that like hour and a half long documentary with James Earl Jones, where he's like, here's how they built all the robots, and here's how the burgeoning CGI industry helped create this and make them more realistic. Like, yeah, it's a very, very innovative movie. It still kind of holds up to this day when you look back
absolutely.
on it.
So you said that you had a quote. It said something like, what was it? Let's go
watch a movie.
Let's go watch a movie. If you look in my senior high school book, this is true. My senior high school yearbook, my senior quote is, hey guys, let's go make a movie. So if I don't make it in the industry, it's really going to come back to bite me in the ass at the 20-year reunion. But anyway, the other thing you said was that it helped launch Jurassic Park, helped launch the visual effects sort of thing. That and Terminator 2 in the year before sort of helped launch the CGI trend that Hollywood has really been sort of spiraling ever since. Yeah. Spiraling in ever since. And what I think is ironic about that is and Stan Winston went out of his way to prove this, most of the dinosaurs in the movie, screen-wise, are animatronic.
Right.
So it's very funny that it was actually a very skillful use of animatronics and this animatronics and CGI. Yeah. But what people took away from that was like, wow, CGI can do anything, and they went crazy with it. And they forgot about the uncanny valley, where to properly sell an illusion, you got to use a combination of these tactics. You got to use practical puppets, people in costumes, and CGI. Yeah. To fully fool the eye, fool the mind. So I just think that was something that was really mastered in that movie that I haven't really seen since. I actually wrote an essay about comparing Jurassic Park to The Wizard of Oz in terms of technology, where The Wizard of Oz you had color technology now, which was you started out in black and white, and most of the movies previous to that were black. A very large majority were black and white, and then you had The Wizard of Oz, which showcases the new technology, but it showcases it in a way that fits to the story well.
Yeah.
So it's not in color until she gets to Oz, right?
Exactly.
Just like.
And you have a movie in the 30s that, like, you have a shot where she opens up a door and you go from sepia tone to black and white, to color in the same shot, which is crazy.
Exactly. So it was a great way to showcase that new technology, and then, of course, the movie was a monumental hit because of it. We're still talking about it to this day. So I think that's a good way that those two movies are similar, because Jurassic Park did the same sort of way to show off that kind of technology.
Right, yeah.
And things blew up after that. Of course, color movies were trends after that, and then after Jurassic Park, everybody wanted to use CGI, no matter how bad it looked sometimes, like in Godzilla at certain times. But
I think the main problem with it is that, like, it's like you said, they were like, wow, CGI is awesome, and they should have looked at it as these effects are awesome.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think that the fact that we've been so CGI-centric has sort of taken the focus away from sort of perfecting, like, puppetry and animatronics and all that, which is still just as valid. Like you were mentioning before we started recording, Annihilation. I don't know if you know this, but that scene with the bear is 50% CGI, 50% animatronic and puppetry. Yeah.
So somewhere exists, like... Because I really liked the design of that creature. It was like, but it was like, he was like skull over its face or whatever. So there's an animatronic that exists to that somewhere.
Yeah, it was mostly just the head, and then like so whenever there'd be a shot of like it, like the head and the shoulders in the shot.
Yeah, I seen. Yeah,
it was like
tied to
it was
someone.
Yeah, it was someone with like their hand sticking through, like working the mouth, and then whenever they would go wide, it would be CGI. But like
very cool. I didn't know that.
And that was one of the things where it's like it takes a lot for a movie to like really get under my skin these days, like if it's trying to do something disturbing with an effect. And that scene, like I was like, man, why is that so unnerving to me? Because it's like with CGI, most of the time you can say, okay, well that's not really there. That's they just put that in the computer afterward. But there's something tangible about having. Not only does it enhance the performance of the actors to have something to bounce off of on the set,
instead of like having to look at a tennis ball or something on a stick or something.
Right, but it like when there's something, it's like you said with the Uncanny Valley. There's something in your head that just connects where you're like, that's a real thing and that's fake. And knowing that it's actually there, I think, especially when you're in a movie like Annihilation or you're doing like a scary effect, knowing that it's something that's physically there is almost more unnerving than anything that they could try and program in. So
I agree. I think that a lot of it, like you said, it enhances the actor's performance, but I think also when you're doing it in CGI, there are so many things that you have to calculate outright, and for most of them there are computer programs, but they don't always get it right, like about lighting and about shadow and about how it interacts with its environment. When you have a physical thing on set that the light is hitting it,
it's already done for you.
Yeah, it's all done for you, and the actors can. It has to make it easier for the actors to be able to act that. Like, there's a real steaming, horrible creature mouth next to you instead of just having to pretend. Like,
exactly, yeah.
It's almost like when you hear the stories about how Ian, I'm blanking on his last name, Ian McKellen, on the set of The Hobbit, having to act surrounded completely by green screen and no other actors.
Right, yeah.
They're like, does it make you a stronger actor to be able to act in those circumstances, to be able to have that, have the character and the motivation still in mind, even though the world around you is the complete opposite of the world that the character is around in the story?
Exactly, yeah.
Does that make you a stronger actor? Or does it break your will? Like the rumor said, Ian started crying on set.
Yeah, he did. Because it's like, because you look back at those first Lord of the Rings movies and everything's forced perspective.
Yeah.
So, like, again, that's something tangible that you could interact with. And
it's in the room.
It gives you a greater appreciation for what you're working for. Because you're like, wow, this is something innovative and groundbreaking. And no one else is doing this. And I'm thrilled to be a part of this. Whereas if you're just in a big, green, empty room, you're like, okay, I guess short Elijah Wood is right next to me, and his head would be right about there, I guess. And that's not to say I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, all CGI is bad and practical effects. I'm not like a purist.
This isn't a make movies great again rally.
Exactly. Yeah. Everything has its place, and I think it's recognizing when it's appropriate to use what technique, rather than treating one technique as sort of like a fix-all. Like you wouldn't you wouldn't put one single lens on for your production and say this is what we're shooting the whole thing with. There's variety. There's different things that go together to create something good. There's not like a one set way to make everything good and correct. I think.
Definitely agree. You need a mixed bag sometimes.
Yeah.
Just to be able to sell the illusion.
So all that is to say that 2001: A Space Odyssey is your favorite movie.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, how much CGI was in that? They didn't even have it really back in the 60s.
Yeah. It inspired Star Wars.
They were doing upside down shots and anti-gravity shots and stuff like that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a tendency to say let's fix it in post with the computers, that
Right.
even in our time together in college, they were trying to get us to refrain from that sort of behavior. Like if you're on set and you have a chance to get another shot and it might look better, and then you wouldn't have to fix it in post, then you got to do that, you know.
Right.
But I think now there was a movie, I can't remember the name of it. There was a guy, it was done by these guys that worked on The Thing, and which movie with great practical effects.
Which one, the 2011 or the
old
82?
One, the old one.
Okay.
So, and then they tried to do another movie in the last 10 years.
Yep.
You might be familiar with it. What's it called?
I can go on and on. It was also called The Thing. What happened was the 82 version was a remake of a movie that came out in the 50s. All of it started with a short film called Who Goes There, which was sort of about, like, the gist of it was the 82 movie, where it's like an alien that can shapeshift and you got to figure out who's human and who's not. The 50s movie was inspired by that, but they kind of took a lot of liberties and changed things around to where it was just like a Frankenstein monster, basically, instead of like an imitator. So John Carpenter took it back to, this is like Jurassic Park for me, I could go on and on about The Thing, but he took it back to the roots of that short story and made it about like an alien that could shapeshift and had all those revolutionary practical effects. And then in 2011, I think it was Universal owned the rights to The Thing, and they wanted to do a sequel. Originally, this is a fun tangent, but originally they were going to get, what's his name?
It's Alex something, isn't it? Or
no, it was the guy who did the first season of The Walking Dead, Shawshank Redemption, Frank Darabont. Very
great director.
He was going to do a mini-series on Sci-Fi about in the 80s, a rescue team shows up and recovers, spoiler alert, recovers the two bodies of the characters at the end of the 1982 Thing, and brings them back to like an Area 51-esque place in the desert in the States. And then one of them thaws out and becomes the Thing and infects like a small town.
Okay.
And then the whole movie becomes about the government trying to quarantine this town and prevent the Thing from spreading. So he was going to do that as a miniseries, and then they shelved that in favor of what I think you're talking about, which was the 2011 prequel that was set a few days before the events of the 82 movie. Because what happens in the 82 movie is the Thing is unleashed at like a Norwegian base, and then it turns into a dog and escapes to the American base where the John Carpenter movie takes place. So the 2011 Thing was all about what happened at that Norwegian base, first of all.
That was the remake.
That was the sort of like soft remake, mostly. It was like a prequel remake, but also like the same exact story beats of like, we don't know what this alien does, and then there's like the doubt, and then they come up with a test to figure out who's human, and then everything goes to hell and all that. But the controversy was they wanted to stay as faithful as possible to the original one and not use CGI unless they absolutely had to. So they came up with a bunch of brilliant practical effects to like pay homage to the first one, and then the studio saw the rough cut and was like, we would rather you just paint over all of this with CGI. So there's not a single practical effect in that movie unless they're looking at a carcass of the Thing.
So this was for the remake then, or
the prequel that came out in 2011. It was, they did a whole bunch of practical effects, and then Universal said, this doesn't look good, we want all of this to be replaced with CGI. And then everyone got mad at the filmmakers being like, oh, why did they use CGI? But it's like, they didn't choose that.
They tried, they didn't
were
have
forced
the choice,
to do that. Yeah. So
I think that remake that you're talking about, the one that ended up using almost exclusively CGI, was so poorly received by some of the people, and you said you know a lot about the Thing, so this might be an interesting little tidbit of information for you, is that one of the guys who was a practical effects artist on the first The Thing, his name was Alec Gillis. I thought it was Guinness, I couldn't remember, but I was like, no, Alec Guinness was definitely a guy from Star Wars.
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Of course I know him. He's me. No, but so this guy's name is Alec Gillis. He worked on the older Thing, and then they saw the new The Thing. He might have been consulted on the new Thing, but I remember it being such a bad reaction that he actually made a Kickstarter to go make his own The Thing movie.
Yeah, I remember that.
And that came to fruition in 2015. I couldn't remember what the movie was called. It's called Harbinger Down.
I haven't seen it.
Have you never seen it?
No.
So this one, they did come through with the practical effects, but it is kind of a cautionary tale. Because now Harbinger Down, it has like Lance Henriksen in it. Like it's actually a decent movie.
Okay.
And it's about an ice fishing vessel in the Arctic who ends up coming across the thing-like alien, which is capable of shape-shifting, and there's like reptilian tentacles, and I don't want to spoil it too bad for you, but because I do think it's worth a watch.
Okay.
But it's a cautionary tale in such a way that when you put a practical effects guy behind the camera as a director, he's sort of, I don't know if he doesn't know how to shoot it, but a lot of it you can kind of tell it was like the way that the tentacles are moving. I don't know if you could see the wires, or you could just like your mind puts the wires there, even though they might have went through the effort to hide the wires.
Yeah.
It still kind of looks like something that the wires are jerking around. Like it requires something more than just practical effects. So that just goes to show you that there's no film purists here that are talking about, oh, we need just practical effects, we're going to get rid of CGI completely.
Right.
It needs to be a healthy mix of, and it depends on the particular shot and what the story is. And
exactly.
But yeah, I don't know. Harbinger Down is worth a shot. Came out in 2015. It's definitely worth a viewing if you are interested in.
And it's a short film?
No, it's a full-length film actually. That I guess they got it. I can't remember if they got it completely crowdfunded or if they got it kickstarted and then the studio was interested later down the line.
Okay.
Or I don't remember exactly how that went, but I definitely think it's worth a view if you are interested in films that have practical effects and do movie monster type things. It's definitely worth a shot. Definitely worth a view.
I'll definitely check that out. I think I remember hearing something about that, but I might have forgotten about it.
If only because for you that if you're such a huge fan of The Thing,
definitely
that it's kind of technically part of that legacy.
Right.
But
which to tie it back into our previous point, The Thing is in my top 5.
Yeah. So what are your favorite movies?
Yeah. No. So The Thing is, I usually put it at number 3, and then we'll get into my number 2 another date because I might want to recommend it. But my favorite movie of all time is, I kind of, with what you were saying about the dichotomy of like what's good and what do I like.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of combine that when I'm watching. I don't really separate it out where it's like, this is a technically well-made movie and I really like it, and then this is a movie that's maybe not so technically well-made but I really like it. I just sort of lump them into the same category.
Okay.
My favorite movie of all time is
drum roll, please.
A movie where I think where there's a lot to appreciate about it technically, if not purely from a writing standpoint, but also from a performance and a shooting standpoint. It's called it came out in 2008. It's called Synecdoche, New York. Have you ever heard of it?
No, I've never heard of it.
That's
the title of the film?
Synecdoche, New York. Yeah, it's made by Charlie Kaufman, who was the writer of Being John Malkovich and Eternal Sunshine. Yeah.
That ended up being one of my favorite movies, just based on how it's written.
Yeah,
brilliant, almost stream of conscious, almost.
Exactly. So he wrote and directed this movie. It was his first time directing anything. Philip Seymour Hoffman's in it. A whole bunch of great supporting actors. It's Philip Seymour Hoffman, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Catherine Keener, Michelle Williams.
Wow.
I forgot that one guy. If you heard his voice, you'd recognize him. I forget what his name is.
Can you think of anything else that he's in?
He does a lot of like bit parts. The only other movie I can think of off the top of my head is another Charlie Kaufman movie called Anomalisa. But he's a bit part in it. But yeah, the Synecdoche, New York is the gist of it is Philip Seymour Hoffman is a 40-something playwright and playwright and director who is severely depressed, and his life is kind of in shambles. He's in a marriage where his wife is kind of disconnected from him, and the only joy he kind of gets is like in his plays and his daughter. And the whole movie is sort of his life from ages like 40 up until like 80-ish. And the whole movie is his life just falling apart. Basically, it's things start off bad for him, and they just keep getting worse and worse and worse as it goes. But that sounds terrible, but like the way that it's done is like it's sort of like the whole movie is a metaphor. It sounds so pretentious to say, but like if you watch it, you'll get what I mean. But the whole thing is sort of like a metaphor for like life itself. Like as you're watching this movie, you're like there's sort of like these subtle bits of dialogue and monologues that Philip Seymour Hoffman goes on where he's talking about his life and his struggles, and when you're listening to that, you're kind of like, wow, that kind of relates to life as a whole. Like, there's a scene where he's with his company. It's not one of the not so subtle moments in the movie, but he's sitting with his acting troupe, and he's like, I want to do this play about how everyone you've ever met is going to die. You're going to die. The one thing we all have in common is that we're going to die, and yet here we all are ignoring it and living in the moment, and I want to explore this idea that everything beautiful has to end. And like, that's sort of like the gist of the movie is watching him like kind of dealing with these own thoughts that he's trying to put into this play that he keeps on trying to make. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger, where he's like, this play has to be realistic, and to the point where it eventually gets to be where the play is literally verbatim his own day-to-day life, hiring other actors to play versions of people he knows. He hires an actor to play a version of himself. It gets to the point where he's like, okay, well, if this is a play about my life, then my actor needs to be making a play, so we need to hire an actor to play the actor playing me in the play, and it just keeps on snowballing. And but
I like that.
It's very, if you liked Eternal Sunshine,
it's almost like
very strange.
Citizen Kane shot where he's looking in the two mirrors on the opposite sides,
exactly.
and you just see like an infinite, like, okay, so I'm directing a play about a guy who needs to be directing a play about a guy who needs to be directing a play about a guy.
Basically, yeah. But like the whole movie, it's a very depressing movie, but not through it trying to depress you. It talks a lot about these thoughts and experiences that everyone
it sounds like
has.
It touches on a lot of things that make you human, thinking
exactly.
about your own mortality, and everything beautiful comes to an end, like you said.
Right.
So that's the kind of thing that can make a movie really great if it identifies with a lot of people on that certain level.
Yeah, and it's not even just that too. There's so many other things, like how you relate to other people and how you're sort of stuck in your own perspective, and you can never really know somebody. And like, there's the whole movie, almost every single line of dialogue is a metaphor for something else, and it's not all just like, here's a bunch of pretentious garbage thrown out that I've been thinking that's not related to, like, everything,
and not tied together at all.
Exactly, everything is so neatly tied together to the point
Charlie
where
Kaufman, man, how does he do it?
Exactly.
How does he do it?
He's a genius. He
must spend years on one screenplay.
He made that movie, and then I think he didn't make another movie again until 2015, and we'll talk about that at another time too, because both of those movies that are what I really want to recommend. But yeah, I've talked about Synecdoche, New York enough.
So that's your number one.
That's my number one.
You said you can't talk about your number two right now.
I will get to my number two, because
you have a very rigid list.
At least when we get to my top 5, it's pretty rigid. Like, there are movies like the top 10 is like a little loosey goosey, but once you get into top 5, it's like, okay, these are movies I all love for various reasons, and they're kind of like firmly. It would take a lot for me to see something and knock it out of place.
The way I think about movies and favorite movies is, for me it's a lot more organic. Like, the two movies that I mentioned, 2001 and Jurassic Park, will always hold a high place, as will a lot of other movies. Like, I could probably give you a rough top 10, but it would very much change from day to day.
Right.
Some days Jaws might be up there, some days it might not be up there, some days, like, I just watched Back to the Future again the other day, and now I'm like, wow, Back to the Future is one of my favorite movies. And then I would go on a Zemeckis kick, go watch Flight, or go watch Roger Rabbit, Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Right.
He's a great director.
He is, yeah.
And then, but it's a much more organic change for me. I try not to restrict myself to a rigid list, but that's impressive to me that you did, because I can't do that. I narrowed it down to those two movies, just in terms of one by technical standards and one by technical standards and entertainment value.
Right.
I think they both have great entertainment value.
Yeah. I'll definitely recommend that movie to you at some point, because I've recommended it to a few people, and the general thought I usually get back is like, that was depressing, pretentious garbage. Why would you make me watch that? So I'm really interested to see what you would say about that.
About Synecdoche?
Yeah, we'll get to that at some point. If you want to watch it on your own, go for it.
I'm definitely going to look it up. You can look forward to my review.
It's a little tricky to find, but it's worth it if you can. But yeah, so one other thing that I kind of wanted to do before we get into like the main recommendation portion was, we're in a new decade now.
This is true.
There's a YouTuber I follow called YourMovieSucks.org. Have you ever heard of him?
I haven't seen any of his videos. I guess the title is a cute reference to Ebert's book.
A little
Your
bit,
Movie
yeah.
Sucks.
A little bit, yeah.
But no, I don't know who he is. I've never seen his.
He's a movie reviewer. He was sort of like my main inspiration for when I did that
It's
recommendation
not Chris Stuckman,
list.
Is it?
No. Chris Stuckman is someone else.
Okay.
This guy is he's a very, very harsh critic, but I've yet to watch a movie that he's recommended where I'm like, oh, I didn't like that. Like every single recommendation I've got from him has been pretty good. Not like from him personally, but he said, point being, he was in a Q&A at one point for a convention, and he said something like, the statement that there's no good movies being made anymore is inherently false, because when we think back to like the 80s, we think of like The Thing, Star Wars, Back to the Future, but we don't think about like Manos, The Hands of Fate. So it's all about perspective once we get so far removed.
And I'm sure there was a lot of people
period.
back then who kind of had a begrudging attitude towards things like Star Wars just because they were so popular, but now we look back on them and almost like when Titanic came out and it was so big that people were like, Titanic, you like Titanic, but now of course we're going to look back on that and say it's a great movie because it was.
Right.
You know, it's almost something like the anti-bandwagon effect.
Yeah.
You know, something like that.
So like my idea behind this was like we're not like, once we get towards the later part of the 2010s, we're still kind of connected to those a little bit, but 2010 and 2011 is so far past us at this point that we kind of have perspective a little bit to look back and say, man, what were the best movies of the
what
decade?
stuck around and what didn't.
Exactly. So what do you think are some of the best movies that have come out in the past 10 years?
From the past decade, I'm gonna have to say that of any movies coming out nowadays, I am the most a fan of anything Christopher Nolan does because I find him to be an astounding writer-director. Inception, I think, is definitely up there, and The Dark Knight, of course. I don't know if that was actually before 2010.
That was 2008, I think.
Yeah. Well,
it's
I think he still has a huge influence over, like, he's got a huge influence over Hollywood. Interstellar. Yeah. And he's just coming out with this new one, Tenet, which...
I haven't seen the trailer for that yet.
No, you haven't seen the trailer? I think it looks interesting. Over the past 10 years, it's tough for me to sort of collate. I really enjoyed Dunkirk. That was another Christopher Nolan. I'm just going to keep talking about Christopher Nolan, I guess. But no, those are really the movies that sort of stood out to me. I mean, over the past 10 years. I haven't gotten to go to theater as much as I would like to, but I have to say I've just been really impressed by Christopher Nolan's stuff. I just think I think he's a great director, and I look forward to see what he's got coming down the pipe. And I don't know if The Prestige was this decade either. I think that might have actually been before The Dark Knight. That was,
I think, 2006.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Well, everything's older than 10 years. What were you like in the last 10 years? Oh, you remember that movie 12 years ago? So, what about you? What about your favorite films of the decade?
I kind of did it a little bit more, again, like you said, with my top 10 being rigidly. I kind of thought about it a little bit more, like, rigid, I guess. I went on my IMDb, and I sorted it by year.
Okay.
I was like, what was the movie what were the highest rated movies I watched that year?
He crunched the numbers.
Exactly. I crushed the numbers. So I did one movie per year up to 2019 as what I thought was my favorite. So 2010 easily was Scott Pilgrim vs. the World.
Okay. That was a very creative, very colorful film.
That was my favorite movie of all time for a while.
I remember that. I do remember that, yeah.
That was a moment where it was a very, like, kind of eat my own words moment where everyone was like, oh, it's Scott Pilgrim, it's amazing, you're going to love it. And I was like, oh, stop talking about Scott Pilgrim. And then I saw it in, like, a rental bin somewhere, and I was like, okay, fine, I'll give this a shot. And I watched it, and I was like, this is amazing. Like, I've seen that movie dozens of times by now, and there's still moments where I'm like, oh, that's a joke I never picked up on. Or, like, that's something, like, new to appreciate about it. It's just such a like, most people are like, oh, the Cornetto trilogy when you think of Edgar Wright. But I think that Scott Pilgrim is pretty much the best thing he's done.
Yeah.
Moving on to 2011.
He did Baby Driver too, right? There's the Cornetto trilogy, and then Baby Driver, and then Scott Pilgrim.
He did a couple other ones too.
I'd be interested in seeing what else he's done, because I think he's good.
He's very good.
He's very quick to, like, tie something up. Like, in a Charlie Kaufman film, everything's connected, everything else all over the film.
Right.
I find in an Edgar Wright, Edgar Wright is sort of like almost like Charlie Kaufman with training wheels, I feel like, because it's much more friendlier to a broader viewer audience.
Exactly.
I feel like recommending Synecdoche, New York, and then recommending somebody Baby Driver. Like, I think recommend somebody Baby Driver, it's a pretty safe bet to come back and say, well, that was a really fun movie, you know, that was really interesting. Instead of something like, oh, that was pretentious twaddle, what was that?
Exactly, yeah.
Something that might not take multiple viewings. That's the thing about Kaufman movies. They would take multiple viewings to really understand.
Yeah.
As opposed to a Edgar Wright film, which desires to be
multiple viewings.
Yeah, it definitely rewards you for multiple viewings, but it desires to be understood in the first viewing.
Exactly.
You know, it makes things nice and clear cut for an audience.
Right.
He's a good director.
And sort of dovetailing off of that with Scott Pilgrim specifically, one thing I did after I saw the movie is I went back and I read the graphic novels.
Mm-hmm.
And the last editions of the graphic novels were being published while the movie was being worked on. So the movie, once you get towards the end of the movie, it's a little bit different how it ends in the comics. So, but what I thought was interesting about it was that there's so much shit that happens in the comics where there's no way to pack it all into the movie.
Mm-hmm.
But what's wonderful about it is that if they couldn't find a way to fit it into the movie, they find a way to fit it into the dialogue. So it's a movie where you can watch it on its own and still appreciate it. But again, if you're a fan of the source material, it's like, okay, we're not doing something totally different here. We are recognizing where this came from, and here's a special nod for those of you who have stuck with this long. Like there's a scene in the comics where it talks about Scott in his high school days where he like beats up a bunch of bullies to rescue this girl or whatever, and that's like a whole chapter in one of the comics, and then it's sort of mentioned in a throwaway line when they're in a club at one point, and you hear that and you're like, oh man, that's really clever. I like that. So, but yeah, Edgar Wright is, I think, a king of visual comedy, and that sort of story suits his style very well.
King of visual comedy, definitely.
Moving on to 2011. This was my favorite movie of 2011. Going to your point earlier about like what you like versus what is actually good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm at the point in my life where I kind of think, okay, this movie isn't technically great, but I can still appreciate it for its nostalgic value and the things that I experienced from it. It's Kevin Smith's Red State.
Okay.
I think that one thing we didn't really mention that much was, I mean, we do media-related stuff, but like our main thing is we love to do like film production and writing and directing and editing and acting and everything, but
anything about the creative aspect of
exactly. So I think one thing I always, whenever you hear, I think, any director talk about like what was their inspiration, they usually mention like, oh, I was always into cameras and I like telling stories, but then I saw this one movie and then that's what made me believe I could do it. And Red State was that for me. I was like, from a writing standpoint, from a way it was shot and from the way it was edited, and then when I learned about how quickly they made it and how low budget it was, I was like, man, anything is possible. I could go out and make that movie if I wanted to.
How old were you when you first saw it?
That was high school. I think maybe junior year of high school. I saw it at a party. No, it was the end of junior year of high school because I had a friend who was very, very, very into Kevin Smith, who his first movie was Red State that he saw of Kevin Smith's, and then so he went back and watched Kevin Smith's whole filmography, and Red State is so far removed from like the usual like stoner comedies that Kevin Smith used to make,
right.
But it's such an interesting like, I don't know, like there's so many things about that movie where I'm like, okay, these performances aren't that great, but like, oh, Michael Parks, like, as this crazy preacher, is like, oh man, he steals the show. Or like, oh man, they edited this while they were shooting it and they had a rough cut like on the last day of shooting. That's crazy. Like that old kind of like run and gun mentality. I loved it. But yeah, I saw it the last day of junior year of high school because we had a class where we had to make a media class, and we had to make a movie trailer as like our final project, and we didn't have any classes the last day, but the project was due by the end of the day on the last day, so we we locked ourselves in this little like 8x5 editing room, and we just edited it all day long. And like it's funny and nostalgic when you look back on it. Obviously nowhere near like what I would make now, but I was like, oh man, this is what I want to do. That was a blast, like working on that all day. This is great. I want to do this for a living. And then my friend was like, oh yeah, you should check out this guy who's kind of offers the same mentality you're talking about. And then that sort of like snowballed and made me want to like work on my first feature, and then like sort of inspired a lot of my earlier short films. Then as I got older, I was like, yeah, technically this isn't a great movie, but like I can respect it because this is what my inspiration was.
When we first met, and you were telling me you were a huge Kevin Smith fan back when we first met.
That was around the point where I was like, it's kind of starting to be like, yeah, he has his place, but like there's other people out there.
Well, I think I did go out and watch Red State after you recommended it to me the first time, I believe, and I think in there is a really good pitch for a film. I think it is a very interesting concept. I don't know if I would have took it, like, by the end, I was kind of like, you know, we're sort of a little bit lost in the sauce here. Kevin Smith is just having fun.
Right.
But like you said, I didn't know how low budget it was or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I do think the initial concept is interesting. You have a Westboro Baptist Church type group who's kidnapping people. You know, I don't want to spoil it too much, but that's pretty much the pitch.
Yeah.
And I thought that Kevin Smith really has a gift for coming up with good pitches for ideas.
Yeah.
Like, he really has a good, like, it's this, but this. Like, he's really got a great...
He's a great writer.
Yeah, great writer, absolutely.
The one thing, if I would say, like, if there was nothing else going for that movie, you can't predict where it's going.
That's true. I can predict that.
And it's never in a way where it's like, this is so out of left field and unbelievable. Like, everything in that movie makes sense that it would happen. But it's done in a way where it's like you couldn't see it coming.
Kevin Smith is an interesting writer because when I was watching Red State for the first time, are you ever watching a movie and you're like, this movie has me, like, this is a great movie, like, I love this movie. So I was watching, this is the only movie, Kevin Smith's movies are the only movies where I do this, where in the beginning, like, when the kids are getting kidnapped and put in dog cages and shit, I'm like, this has me, like, this is good, like, I already kind of know what it's about. It's about these Christian dickheads who are too self-righteous, and they're trying to right the world a little bit and by kidnapping these delinquents, and you know, they lured them in with the promise of a MILF or whatever it was. Right. And like, by then I had it, and then later on in the movie it started to meander a little bit, and then that's when he sort of lost it. Kevin Smith is the only writer where I'll do that well. I'll be like, wow, he's got me, and then later on I'll be like, sort of lost me a little bit.
Right.
And then I went and looked. I did a little more research about Kevin Smith, and I started seeing things like Tusk. Where I was like, wow, okay, he's a little off of his rocker.
Exactly.
I think his podcast would be something to give a listen to. I've never listened to Kevin Smith's podcast.
He's a very good talker too. Really? Like I think that's his main passion.
It's funny for Silent Bob. I guess that's the joke.
Exactly. He loves having a good conversation and like just sort of letting it all, like one thought lead to the next. Like a bunch of his movie ideas have come out of his podcast. Like Tusk came out from them reading like a fake Craigslist ad, and it was for like someone who was like, you can stay in my apartment rent free, but you have to dress up like a walrus once a day for 2 hours a day.
What?
And he was like, oh, this is a good premise for a horror movie, and then he wrote that. So, but yeah, his podcasts are all. I would say the main one to listen to is his main one, which is called Smodcast. I don't follow them anymore, but like that's the one where I followed it the most consistently, or to the point where I can recommend it. And then moving on to 2012, this is why I held off on saying my second favorite movie, because this is the year my second favorite movie came out.
Okay.
Or, well, it was at least released in a full feature format. It's Such a Beautiful Day by Don Hertzfeldt. Are you familiar with him?
No, I'm not familiar.
Have you seen ever on YouTube Rejected Cartoons? If you saw a clip of it, you might. So he's an animator who does everything to this day. Well, not to this day.
Oh wait! My spoon is too big.
Yeah, that's Don Hertzfeldt. So he made a.
Wow, that was a long shot. I can't believe that was the one.
Yeah. But he made a over the course of the 2000s, he made 3 short films that featured a character called Bill dealing with like his day-to-day life, and over the course of the short films, you find out that Bill has a mental illness that is slowly killing him.
Okay.
And so the movie is his life and his observations sort of told through the third person, but like in a way where you can sort of be like, I am Bill, because it's all stick figure animation, so like it's very easy to project into the characters, I think.
Okay.
So it's a very short, it's only about an hour long when you watch all of them back to back, but it's I would call it a more accessible Synecdoche, New York. Like it communicates a lot of the same ideas about like life and our relationships with other people and how we process things and how we deal with our own mortality and deal with our circumstances and all that, but it's done in a way where it's much more compact and a little bit more in your face, but not to the point where it's grating. Mm-hmm. And I would recommend them. And then if you want to get a taste for it, if for whatever reason an hour-long movie is not a worthwhile commitment for you, on Don Hertzfeldt's channel he uploaded the first segment. It's 3 short films. He uploaded the first one for free on YouTube, but they're all like connected. So if you look up Don Hertzfeldt's channel, and I think the first segment's called Everything Will Be Okay, you'll be able to watch the first 20 minutes of it for free and see if you want to continue with the other 2.
It's really creative. I'm gonna have to look it up.
Yeah.
It's Such a Beautiful Day.
It's Such a Beautiful Day is the full. It's 3 short films. The first one is Everything Will Be Okay. The second one is I'm So Proud of You, and then the third one is also called It's Such a Beautiful Day. But if you look up the entire movie as a whole, the whole thing is just called It's Such a Beautiful Day.
Okay.
And that's like all 3 of the short films edited together so that it plays seamlessly one into the next and into the next. But you could also watch the other 3 short films in that order and get the same experience. So then, moving on to 2013 was a bit more mainstream. Was Her by Spike Jonze.
Of course.
Yeah. Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson. I love that movie. I like to say that that was the Charlie Kaufman movie he never made, because I feel like it's very much like something that he would have made, and Spike Jonze is the person who did direct, like Being John Malkovich and Adaptation, which was another good Charlie Kaufman movie.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of had a hand in that style a little bit. But yeah, I think most people know Her, but so I don't really need to talk about that one as much. But that was my favorite of 2013.
That was 2013?
2013.
Okay, I've got a movie from this year that we can put into this that I think would be interesting to talk about, because everybody always says it's been one of the greater movies that they've seen recently. Okay. The Wolf of Wall Street, Scorsese.
That was 2013 too.
That was 2013. Yeah. So you've got Scorsese and DiCaprio, but everybody was ranting and raving about this movie, about how great it is, and I do think it's a great movie, but I don't think it's a great movie. I don't think people realize what they're saying when they say it's a great movie. You know what I mean? Because Scorsese is just such a genius, and the writer Terrence Winter, I believe, who wrote the script for that, based on the book by the real Jordan Belfort. There's like an in-joke the entire time in that movie where the main character is just an irredeemable douchebag. He's a terrible person.
And not just the main character, like all of the main characters.
Yeah. I would argue there was barely a redeemable character. Maybe the FBI guy.
Yeah,
and he's played off as the bad guy.
Exactly.
So, but that's the genius of Scorsese, because in this way he's talking about the American rat race. Like, there's a great scene in that movie where they're all sitting around the diner and they're like talking about,
sell me this pen.
Yeah, sell me this pen, right? And he says, and the other thing he's talking about in that scene is he's talking about I could sell lewds to a convent full of nuns is one thing he says, but he's talking about what do people want? People want to make money. People want to be successful. They want to be rich. And the one guy goes, "Well, I met this guy who's an Amish dude. He says he just wants to make furniture," and it's like. And he's like, and then DiCaprio goes off on him. He says, "No, I'm talking about normal, hardworking, regular people." And like, there's one word that he's missing from that tangent: American people. Like, I'm talking about normal, hardworking Americans. Like, that's the one word that's missing from that tangent that fits in too perfectly.
Right.
And it's sort of good. That scene right there sort of encompasses what the movie is about. Is that in this sort of American rat race that we have, the bad guys, like the bad guys are sort of become the good guys.
Yeah.
Because their struggle to make money, like everybody wants to make money, like that's the point of the scene. But in the struggle to make money, he stepped on a lot of people, talked to a lot of people out of money. Like, he was scamming plumbers out of their like mortgage payments and stuff like that. But he's played off as the hero. And in the end, when I watched the movie in theaters the first time, I felt like there was almost no resolution, because the main character pretty much got away with it.
Exactly.
But that's the point of the movie.
Exactly.
He's super rich. He gets to go to a super rich prison. He's set up and fine for the rest of his life. And if you're the real Jordan Belfort, you just got a movie made about your exploits, and you had a best-selling book that you wrote on top of it.
Exactly. I literally said that same point. I showed it to a couple friends, The Wolf of Wall Street, and we got to the end, and they were like, "Yeah, that was good, but I really don't like that ending." It's like, there's something
unsatisfying about it.
He's just fine at the end. I was like, well, yeah, that's the point. It's that he's an awful person and did awful things, but that's what we reward in this society.
Yeah.
If you can do awful things and profit off of it, then you're still considered successful.
When I hear people say that The Wolf of Wall Street is their favorite movie, I think it's because, well, it had Leonardo DiCaprio in it, doing crazy rich people stuff, doing coke out of a hooker's ass, and then like just living crazy, and like, yeah, that was my favorite movie because it was so crazy and all over the place. But really, there's a lot to examine there about what Scorsese is saying. He's holding a very harsh mirror up to the American lifestyle, to the American dream. There's, like I said, there's a lot of hidden subtext in that movie where the only words missing out of what they're saying are Americans or American dream or something like that. So that's what I'll say about 2013.
Yeah, it was a pretty good year for movies. 2014, though, that was a great year for movies, and that brought us my favorite movie of that year, Whiplash.
Whiplash, yes.
I loved that movie.
I haven't seen it in its entirety, but I regret it.
It was a close tie between.
I love J.K.
Yeah, that's a career best for him, I think.
Really, I definitely.
Yeah, he does a great. Are you familiar with the Portal video games?
Yes, I am.
Have you played
Combustible Lemons?
Yeah, exactly. That's. I was like, there's no way he's ever going to top Combustible Lemons, and then he comes.
I thought he was never going to be able to top J. Jonah Jameson. Honestly.
Exactly. What's the kid's name? Miles Teller. He was pretty great too. There's so many.
He's so hit and miss, I find, but yeah.
But one thing that I love about that movie that not a lot of people mention is the soundtrack. Like, obviously, you have a lot of scenes of them like playing music in that like conservatory room, and then when they're on the stage, and there'll be like natural music when you hear people like practicing in other rooms and all that. But one thing that I noticed that not a lot of people mention is that whenever there's like a tense scene happening, there's always like this really low drone that's in the background, and like as it gets more intense, it gets louder and louder and louder, and like it's so subtle that like I think it like really like
it's effective though.
It's effective, but you wouldn't think about it as effective. It's just one note going for like a 5-minute scene, and it gets louder and quieter as it gets more intense.
It's almost the kind of thing where you're watching the scene, and you're almost like, why is this so intense? Like,
exactly.
Why does it feel so intense?
It's subconscious.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about it, is because they thought about it on all those different layers.
Mm-hmm.
So Whiplash was a great movie.
And we're talking about 2014 still. I'm working off of a list of movies from 2010 from the decade, just so I can keep up with you. Part that I didn't do my homework, but or
you could say I did my homework too well.
Yeah. Well, if we're talking about 2014, also Interstellar came out that year.
Yeah.
And I definitely want to talk about this movie. We're talking about the past 10 years, Birdman with Michael Keaton.
That was a close tie.
Really?
I was either, is it Birdman or is it Whiplash? And I went with Whiplash just because of J.K. Simmons' performance.
I feel like Birdman has
how tight that is.
I feel like Birdman has a lot in common with Synecdoche in a way, because it's about a man who's like thinking about his legacy and doing this play that's got to be summative of his legacy, but it's never enough for him. And and you know what I mean? It's a very like man focused on his own image, but it's never what he wants, and it just sort of explores that dynamic a little more. I really thought Birdman was a great movie, and Alexander Gonzalez Inarritu, I hope I pronounce it right.
I don't. Yeah,
but AGI, I'll call him.
Yeah.
But he's
yet to make a movie where I'm like, that's not good.
Yeah. No, he's excellent.
A fantastic director.
He really is. And the way they did Birdman, I don't know if it was truly all in one shot, or if they were doing little tricks like every time you turn around and there's like a moment of darkness.
Right.
Maybe they did a little cut there or something.
Yeah,
but even then, I think the effect that it was supposed to have was that it was supposed to feel claustrophobic and sort of like this guy was almost getting sick of himself. I thought it was very effective. Thought it was a very, very great movie. Yeah. Greatly made. Also, one of the greater lines, smells like balls.
So then, moving on to 2015, we got another Charlie Kaufman movie. His most recent movie, Anomalisa, which I also highly recommend. It's a stop motion. It's sort of, again, a more accessible version of Synecdoche, but it doesn't really communicate a lot of the same ideas about life and death. It's more so about like how we relate to other people and relationships and whatnot. But yeah, that one's hard to summarize. It's like this motivational speaker guy.
You said it was stop motion?
It's stop motion animation.
That's very interesting. I think I saw a trailer for it actually.
Yeah, it was considered for best animated movie of the year, and then I think like Frozen won. It really made me mad because but like that's a whole other
Disney stacked it up.
Basically. But it's so the whole movie is like you have this motivational speaker guy who leads a kind of sad life. He can't really relate to everybody, and how they communicate that. I didn't realize until like we got 20 minutes into the movie when I was watching it. I was like, what they did was they have him, and he's like a British guy, and everyone else around him I didn't realize until there was a conversation between him and two other people. But everybody else in the movie is played by the same actor. And
is it Justin Roiland?
No. It's that guy.
That's some vocal.
It's that guy that I couldn't remember, but it's all the same voice. It's like a very monotone. Like if it's a woman, if it's an old man, if it's a baby, it's like all the same voice. And
that's interesting.
And the face on every single character model for someone who's not him is this just very bland, plain face that doesn't have nothing stands out. And he's kind of dealing with like that he can't relate to anybody. He feels alone. And then when he's in this hotel, it all takes place over the course of like a day or two, where he goes to this hotel and he starts to have this crisis, and then in the hotel he meets someone who's different, who like it's this woman who has like a different face and sounds different from everybody else, and he kind of like falls in love with her purely because she's different and he can somehow relate to her. And it's sort of like a love story in a way, but it's also like a cautionary tale where it's like how we lust for people based on like superficial things, and how there's always again you're forced in your own perspective. You never really know what someone else is thinking, and
it's almost like Shakespearean in that way, how Romeo and Juliet fell in love at first sight like that,
right?
And then like I've never seen it, what you're talking about, but I've seen a trailer for it, but it does look very interesting, and it did look like it explores very existential themes like that. And there's something about stop motion that kind of is existential on its own.
Exactly. Yeah.
Something about it, I don't know.
And again, Charlie Kaufman, so it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is 2015?
2015, yeah.
I've got two movies for 2015.
Okay.
So we're talking about AGI with Birdman. Now we're talking about The Revenant.
Yes.
The Revenant was also a very beautiful movie. A lot of landscape shots, but I mean, this is the one that Leo crawled through the mud for the Oscar, right?
Exactly.
That's the one I got him in. So we got to talk about it. But it was a really well-made movie. I found it to be very exhilarating. The action scenes were very well shot because it was sort of shot with a very wide lens.
Yeah.
And
you
still
see the sort of like floating one take method in some instances.
Yeah, he doesn't like to cut, which I like. So there's like the way that it's very widely shot, you'll see an action scene where there's like some natives coming down the hill on their horses.
Yeah.
But the way that it's shot, they're like so small that you can barely see them, or until they're too close or something. Like, I just thought it was a very brilliantly shot movie. Great script, great job by DiCaprio, and very exhilarating action scenes.
Yeah.
And talking about exhilarating action scenes, I don't know if it'll hold a candle to the next one that I have for 2015, which is Mad Max Fury Road.
Yeah.
Which I think, in terms of cinema, was one of the more bonkers sort of like balls to the wall entertainment and nothing else sort of films that came out in the last decade.
Right.
Like, I mean, Mad Max movies have a long history of sort of being almost exploitation films in terms of how violent and how crazy and how out of pocket they are.
Yeah.
But Fury Road with George, now I'm blanking. Is it George Miller? I think it's George Miller.
Yeah, George Miller.
But yeah, what an amazing job on this one. Also with the color direction, the reds, the sand tones, and the browns, and the real post-apocalyptic sort of feeling.
Exactly. Yeah.
I really thought Mad Max Fury Road was, and most of the effects in there are practical too. I think there was like one car accident or one scene that was done with CGI, and the rest were practical effects. So
right.
that was a movie that really impressed me this decade with just how entertaining it was, sheer entertainment value.
Yeah. And
I heard from everyone else who saw it couldn't stop ranting and raving about it. They're like, this movie is amazing. This movie is like adrenaline pumping 100 miles an hour, the heartbeat, like insanity.
Exactly.
And like I agree. And that's one of those movies where there's almost no backstory.
Right.
Like everything is told. It's almost like Kill Bill in that way. It's storytelling without a story. Everything is told right there in front of you. Like, you want the answers, just look at the screen.
Yeah.
And we might give you some answers if you're lucky, if we're feeling nice. Meanwhile, here's some amazing action scenes. Like, for a price of a movie ticket, I don't know what else you could want when it comes to Mad Max Fury Road.
Yeah, and at the very least, you can say it's one of the instances where the sequel is better than the original.
I think it's up there, yeah, for sure. That was better than Thunderdome. No.
So then we move on to 2016. That was a little hard. I don't know why. I couldn't find many movies I watched in 2016 where I was like, oh man, that's really good. But the one that stood out the most was a documentary called Tickled. Have you ever heard of that?
No. So this is a non-fiction documentary.
It's a non-fiction documentary,
okay.
Yeah. So it's about this sport primarily on the internet called competitive endurance tickling, okay? Where you get strapped down to a table, like arms and legs restrained.
This is a real thing?
Yes, and people sit on top of you and they tickle you until you can't stand it anymore.
Okay. And I would last about 30 seconds.
Exactly.
If that.
So, but what happens is the guy making the documentary is like a reporter for like a New Zealand website, and he finds this thing and he's like, oh man, this is really weird. This would be a funny story to tell. It's kind of a slow news day. So when he starts to look into it, and he finds this company that produces a whole bunch of these videos on the internet, and he starts asking like, hey, can I come out and like document one of these shoots? Can I like see what goes into this? Sort of as like a joke. And he's like, oh, I want to like show more people about this because this is funny. And all of the responses he gets are like, never contact us again. We'll sue you if you pursue this. We will pursue hefty legal action. So that kind of is like, he's like, oh, well, this is strange. So he looks into it more, and he keeps on getting these legal threats to like, hey, leave us alone. And the more he researches it, the more he figures out that there's like blackmailing to like get these people to make these videos, and there's like this like syndicate of like rich people who will like bring in people from out of the country to like be part of this video, and will like blackmail them with like, we'll revoke your visa if you ever say that we mistreated you. And so it sort of turns into like this really intense like crime
human
story.
Trafficking almost,
basically, yeah,
with like the
right.
secret tickling syndicate.
Exactly. It starts off like you're like,
we only accept payments in Bitcoin.
Exactly. You start off and you're like, there's no way this is real, this is hilarious. But then when you're halfway through the movie, you're like, I never thought that this would be this dark. And it gets very dark by the end of it. Like, it gets into like,
it sounds very interesting.
Yeah, I think it's on Amazon Prime.
What was it called again? It's on Prime. I'll check it out.
I think it's called Tickled.
That sounds bonkers.
Yeah, it's really good. And then did you have anything for 2016?
2016, not really. I mean, all I was gonna say was there was La La Land.
Oh yeah,
which was good. I'm not a huge fan of musicals. That's just how I am. But I thought it was worth mentioning. For 2016,
Moonlight was pretty good. I see that on your list. Yeah.
I haven't had a chance to see Moonlight yet, even though I know there was that whole thing at the Oscars, or the was it the Oscars?
Yeah, it was the Oscars.
With the mix-up.
Right.
You'd think it was almost must have been a huge publicity stunt. You'd think I would have gone and watched it after that, but I didn't. I have to check it out. Moonlight.
Yeah, so that was good. 2017, we're starting to get into. I mean, we were already kind of artsy early on, but now we're pretty much strict artsy.
We started out with some Charlie Kaufman. Exactly. I'd say we're in there.
So my favorite movie of 2017 was Darren Aronofsky's Mother, with Jennifer Lawrence, Javier Bardem. Did you see that one?
No.
You should. It's again, all of the symbolism is very face value, and once you figure out what it's trying to do, you're like, okay, that makes sense. But I don't want to say too much about it because it kind of gives away a lot of the experience of like when you watch it and you're like, okay, so if that's what this means, then this means this, and this means this, and then oh my god, this is what the implication is by the time we get to the end. So, but yeah, Mother was really good.
Oh, you know what? If we go back to 2016, there was. Have you seen Arrival?
Denis
Villeneuve.
Yeah. Denis Villeneuve, yeah.
And Amy Adams.
Yeah.
Really brilliant movie about communication.
Exactly.
With aliens, and
it's something like, you would never think about.
Yeah, like it really broadens your mind, like trying to think about like, well, these aliens might not even communicate in a way that we could even fathom. So like, where do you even start?
Because every single like alien invasion movie is they come down and they blow us up, or they come down and we're just like. Drink, notebook, like, and then they just get and they get it, yeah. Like so, that's an angle that like no one would ever think about.
Yeah, no, I love alien movies that do new things like that. Yeah. But anyway, back to 2017. We finished talking about.
Yeah. There's not much I want to say about that without spoiling it.
I mean, I think definitely this was something that we were forgetting. If we're talking about the past decade, one of the bigger, more meteoric rises in Hollywood would have to be Jordan Peele and the work that he's doing, because 2017 he came out with Get Out, his big breakout movie, and Get Out's a brilliant movie.
It is.
I think. I mean, brilliant subtext. I'm blanking on the name of the main actor, but Bradley Whitford. Daniel, yes.
I forget.
Oh, we're so racist for forgetting his name. No, but anyway, Daniel Kaluuya. That's right. Yeah. I knew it was some kind of alcoholic drink. I didn't want to say Daniel Svedka. I knew that wasn't it. Daniel Kaluuya. No, but I thought Get Out was brilliant. Like, just the Jordan Peele, he went from being a comedian on Key and Peele, to just really being like, he's the kind of guy that like everybody dreams oh, well, I got in being a comedian, but oh, by the way, I happen to have all these ideas about genuine good movies, and I think he's showing us that he has that sort of good taste as a director, and that he actually prefers to scare us more than to make us laugh.
Exactly.
Which I think I also dig. I look forward to anything else. I haven't seen Us, his latest movie.
Yeah, Us is. I would say Get Out is a little bit better than Us, because it handles,
I heard kind of mixed reviews about Us.
Us is still a very good movie, but the one thing that kind of detracts it from me is that, like you said, with the whole comedy aspect, he's very good in Get Out at mixing. It's a comedic horror movie, but like most people think of it as a straight horror movie, but you have those moments where his friend calls in and is like, you gotta get out of that hell no, like, and that's funny. Like it's a comedy horror, but not in the way that like Scream, or not Scary Movie is a comedy horror.
Yeah,
it's mostly scary with like these little pockets of like, okay, we'll release a little bit
and you
of
need
pressure.
that, you need a little comedic release. Yeah,
exactly. So my only problem with that is that Get Out, those scenarios where you get that release, is very controlled, and it makes sense in context of the story. There's moments in Us where you'll have something legitimately terrifying happening, and the dad will say like a one-liner, and you're like, okay, that's like, why would you say that in this scenario? Like, so that was the one thing that kind of made me think like, it could have been a little bit better. But Us was still a very good movie. It doesn't really mix the comedy and the horror as well as it could have, compared to what we know that he's capable of with Get Out.
Well, I'm excited to see anything else that he comes out with, and even when he took over the Twilight Zone, have you seen any of the Twilight Zone episodes?
First episode.
I saw the first one too. Yeah, I think they put it online for free.
Yeah.
But I mean, if he was doing the writing, I'm not sure if he was doing the writing on those. But if he has,
I think he was just hosting. I'm not sure though.
Really, I don't know if he was just. Is he just hosting, or because I feel like he's the kind of guy who would be like, they would come to him and be like, hey, do you want to host Twilight Zone remake, or did he helm it? Did he was like. he was like, you know what I want to do? I want to do a Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
I want to do another iteration of the Twilight Zone series. So I don't know. I should find out more about that. But I wouldn't be surprised if he was at least involved a little bit creatively.
Right.
Because I found him to be a very creative guy.
He is very, yeah. All right, so then moving on, 2018, another strange artsy movie that I can't think of a single other person who saw except for my one friend who I dragged to go see it with me.
He's going for esoteric points.
Exactly.
He wants to pick movies that nobody's heard of.
It was called Climax by Gaspar Noé, who's a famous French director. Have you heard of him?
No.
He did a movie, I think it's just called Love. It's on Netflix, but that's a very kind of like, you have to be in the mood for it. His probably most accessible thing that I can think of might also be on Netflix, called Enter the Void, where it's like a drug dealer who gets killed, and then his soul like floats around the world and like watches how life goes on after he dies. So it's very
like Christmas Carol almost.
Exactly, yeah. So it's artsy and kind of strange, but Climax is you want to talk about like one take movies with AIG, like I don't know for sure if this was one take, but as far as I can remember, there was none of that like we're gonna pass by a dark thing for a second and splice in a new take. Like it was all shot in, well, like 90% of it was one continuous take, and it's this dance troupe that is rehearsing like a show that they're working on, and they've rented out this big theater space with like apartments off to the side of the theater, also in the same building, and they're celebrating like, yeah, we had a great first week of rehearsals, and they have this like after party after the rehearsal's over, and there's like food, and there's this big punch bowl with like sangria laid out on the table, and then while everyone's mingling and talking, someone comes over and pours a shit ton of LSD into the sangria.
Oh.
So then everyone at the party is drinking this sangria.
Tripping
and
balls.
then so you have this like standard movie where it's like the first 20 minutes is like, okay, let's get to know these people and we'll see a little bit of their dance number. But then from the moment that they realize the sangria has been spiked, it turns into this one long take where we follow like one or two characters throughout the theater as they like wander around and just trip the hell out on LSD, and we never see any of what they're hallucinating. All of it is just like watching like third person perspective, watching a whole building
like being
full
the
of
only
people
sober
trip.
one at a party.
Exactly, yeah. And it gets really like dark. Like it's almost a horror movie in some ways, where there's moments where they are like I never liked you, let's lock him outside, and meanwhile it's like a blizzard outside and this guy's in like a t-shirt and jeans, so you have this thing in your back of your mind where like, that guy's freezing to death while everyone is like, and there's a scene where like there's a woman who brought her son to the rehearsal because she couldn't find a babysitter, and he also drank the sangria, so she tries to like protect him by like putting him in a room off to the side to so people like don't mess with him, but then she accidentally locks him in the room and is trying to break him out. So like it turns into, it's like this whole,
and he starts tripping too.
Tripping too. Locked in this like tiny closet basically.
That sounds insane.
It's a really, really good movie.
With a title like Climax, I have to wonder what happens at the climax. Everybody's in the peak of their trip, I guess.
Pretty much.
God enters the room or something.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's a very, very well made movie, and it's like I liked that they didn't go into the whole like here's what everyone is seeing while they're tripping out, because it kind of plays on that thing of like they're dancers, and like you could look at it as like this is one fucked up dance that is happening throughout this building, and we're just sort of watching it happen.
But I think if they had gone that way, they would have turned into like a tripper flick, which is kind of like a stoner flick in a way. You know what I mean? Which they didn't want. They didn't want it to just be a collection of goofy hallucinations. They had a goal and a purpose in mind. Even though I haven't seen the movie you're talking about, I assume that's sort of where it was going.
Pretty much, yeah. It is very good.
That was 2018?
That was 2018. Very beginning of 2018, I think.
For 2018, we already talked about Annihilation, which I just saw the other night, which I think it was, the advertising for that movie was weird because I sort of saw it around here and there, Natalie Portman and this shimmering rainbow something or other, but I had no other idea about anything about it. Something about an alligator too, I didn't remember. But then I finally saw it, and wow, what a like, in terms of concept, like, I haven't seen a horror movie recently that has affected me in that way in a long time. I feel like the closest thing that I can even compare it to would be like an SCP article or something like that. It's something that is just so, it's grounded in science, but at the same time there's a lot of human error. Like there's that one girl, you've seen Annihilation?
Yes.
I mean, yeah, you have it. There's the one girl who starts to flip out and like that's the human element, you know. She's like, Natalie Portman wakes up and they're all tied to chairs, and it's like, really, you guys are already in an expedition into a deadly like place where nothing makes sense. Like, do you really need to like be a spaz on top of it?
Yeah.
But no, it was a very good horror movie. It was
definitely very
creepy. At the end, I was questioning if I walked out into my house at 2 a.m. to go to the bathroom. Are my jeans and the toaster's jeans gonna get switched? We're gonna adapt parts of each other, and no, but I thought that was a really good one from 2018.
It is, yeah.
And you had Black Klansman in 2018, which was one that I didn't get to see, but I really want to see.
I was not that much a fan of Black Klansman.
Really?
It was good, but I didn't think it was as amazing as everyone thought.
Interesting.
Spike Lee is kind of hit or miss for me sometimes. Like, I like a lot of his earlier movies, but everything he's kind of made since, like, 2000 or so, I've kind of been like,
I feel like I would like his earlier stuff. I have to look into it more.
Yeah, like Do the Right Thing is really good.
Yeah, that's the one I want to see.
One. Yeah.
2018, what else? I saw A Quiet Place in theaters when it came out in 2018.
I didn't like A Quiet Place.
You didn't like it? Now that's interesting because whether we like it or not, and I say this as somebody who's generally optimistic about it, John Krasinski's becoming quite a big guy in Hollywood.
Yeah.
After The Office, now they're giving him director roles. He's Jack Ryan.
Yeah.
You know, he's really becoming one of the guys, one of the real celebrity do-it-alls.
Right.
So I think that's interesting. But you didn't like The Quiet Place. I'm interested to hear about that.
I thought it was the trailers were better than the movie. There was just a lot of moments. There was a lot of moments where I watched A Quiet Place and I was like, this doesn't make sense why you're doing it this way. Mm-hmm. Like, if you know that they can't hear you over the sound of the water, then why not just set up shop,
live near water
next to this waterfall? Yeah. Or why would you continue to have children in this world where you can't make any noise because babies are going to cry all the time,
no matter what. Well, now they're making a sequel to A Quiet. They're making A Quiet Place Part 2.
Yeah, I saw the trailer and I don't know. It's that was one movie, that was one instance where everyone was like, "Oh, you got to see it," and I watched it and I was like, "It's okay, but like you're taking this concept of there's not a lot of dialogue, and you're using that as an excuse to justify some pretty legitimate plot holes that are not being addressed in the rest of this movie," and I don't like it when people do that.
Yeah.
I like it when people can be like, yeah, I really like this, but I'll admit that it has these problems. And everyone was like, no, it's great. Like, did you hear how good the sound design was? Like, there was like hardly any dialogue. Like, it's great. I was like, yeah, but why don't they live near the waterfall? No, it's great. It's great. You'll love it. Like, it's just.
Well, I enjoyed A Quiet Place. I thought that, you know, there's a lot of movies that are so dialogue heavy nowadays. The ability to tell a story with limited or almost with no dialogue, takes a certain amount of skill, which I thought was in display pretty well in the movie. John Krasinski directed the first one, and he's going to be directing the second one, and not starring in it because obviously, spoiler, his character dies. But I don't know. I think by the time the second movie comes around, it will have worn out its welcome with me.
Yeah,
because I think it was a good concept for one movie, and they did utilize the concept in a good way, but not to its fullest, I feel like.
Exactly, yeah.
So,
it needed a couple rewrites, I think.
Yeah. I mean, you can have so much fun with people who can't, you can't talk or else the monsters will get you. Like, It almost reminded me of Bird Box in certain ways. Like,
I liked Bird Box even less.
Really?
A lot of the same problems I had with A Quiet Place were like times 10 with Bird Box.
That movie was like, I guess it must have been a marketing campaign, but a lot of people were talking about that movie for the longest time.
There was like after Quiet Place came out, there was like a string of movies that were like a similar gimmick that people like trying to capitalize. Like there was Bird Box, there was a almost verbatim ripoff of A Quiet Place called The Silence, where like one of the only differences was the aliens can fly, or like the creatures or whatever they are. So they're like these birds that swoop down and get you if you make too much noise. Like it's. Yeah, I don't know. Quiet Place was one of those things where I was like...
So you were disappointed?
I was disappointed with it, yeah. I wouldn't call it a terrible movie, but they needed to rewrite a few things, and I think they needed to give a little extra care to how they handled certain elements of it. Like, there's moments where you can clearly tell, like, what I'm seeing right now is being done solely because I'm an audience member watching the movie, and they have to prove a point to me. Like, when they go into the basement, and he has that chalkboard that's like... sound is bad. Why don't they eat their prey? Like the waterfall is safe. It's like
would you want a marker board instead of a chalkboard?
First, it's just like all of those points could have been explained in a much more clever way, like that waterfall thing, for instance.
Instead of literally just putting it on a billboard like a teacher and then putting a camera on it.
Right.
I do feel like while I was in the theater watching that movie that there were a lot of safe choices that they made. Like they could have went a little riskier and did something a little crazier, but they made a safe choice more of the time, which I feel like might be Krasinski's impulse. We'll see with some of his other movies if he stays directing. We'll see. But there were, I feel like it could have been a better movie too. But I didn't think it was. I don't think it's
gonna go that way though. I think the problem is that because he made that movie with an interesting concept and he made those safe choices, and like I said, the overwhelming majority are people who are like, oh, it's great, I love it. Like, yeah, there's problems with it, but whatever. Let's forget that. And I feel like, again, I don't know much about him personally or how he handles his process, but I feel like if it's me, I'm more inclined to listen to that overwhelming majority that's telling me that what I'm doing is perfect, and then I think, okay, well, I'll just do the same thing the second time.
Yeah.
And then I fall into that same trap. I mean, obviously there's exceptions, but we don't know because he only has that one movie to his name. So Quiet Place 2 is going to have to be like that deciding factor to see if he's going to...
Yeah. I'm excited to see what else comes out. I want to see him tackle something fresh. I want to see him direct something that isn't A Quiet Place. If that makes sense. Because I already think the sequel's going to be bad. I might be wrong. It might be a breakout, runaway success. They might bring some new ideas in.
Yeah. Maybe
some new monsters or something. I don't know. But
maybe.
I don't know. I'll hope. Are we in 2019 yet?
Yep, we're in 2019, and we luckily, so we don't have to. We can kind of combine our 2 points here. So the main thing that one of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast is because one of the other drawbacks to that series I did was I was basically talking in a vacuum. I was saying, this is what I think is good, and I think you should watch it. And there was no feedback. Like, I mean, yeah, people can go and watch it on their own, and in some cases I would have friends who said, oh yeah, I watched that movie you recommended. It was pretty good. But like, there was no give or take. There was no here's what I think is good, now you show me what you think is good. There was no dialogue. So
it's hard to extrapolate something by yourself.
Exactly. So the point of this podcast for those listening, because I know we've talked about it a lot, is the main thing that we're going to do, up until now it's been just sort of getting to know you, just general talk and all that. But the main meat and potatoes of every episode going forward is going to be in between episodes, I'm going to recommend Devon a movie or two to watch. And Devon will recommend me a movie or two to watch. And in between recording, we'll watch those movies and we'll have a discussion about it. And if you want to watch along with us, so you can be sort of in on the conversation, you can. Obviously, we don't really have that luxury with this episode, but we'll see what happens. So, my favorite movie of 2019, to sort of combine these 2 points together, was The Lighthouse. By Robert Eggers, starring Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson.
Only Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson.
Pretty
I think
much,
there was like 3 cast members in the whole movie.
Basically.
They're her and the mermaid.
Yes.
That's it.
So, that was my favorite movie of the year, easily, by a landslide. And that was the movie that I recommended Devon watch before we started recording. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it.
I thought that this was a very, very different movie. We had a little conversation before about how I think movies get picked to be made. I have a very hard time picturing how this movie got picked to be made because the pitch, I mean, it's kind of bare bones, if you know what I mean. There's 2 guys on an island, and it's pretty much like, and then go from there. Like it's sort of conceptually, it's hard for me to see how a bunch of studio heads thought that they could make money off of it, which in a way it makes it even more of a miracle that it got made at all, because I do think it's a very good film. There's a lot of good things in it. I thought that the soundtrack of it, like the director clearly likes to make these harrowing psychological movies that sort of wear down on your psyche a little bit. The soundtrack of the movie does that wonderfully. It's almost comparable to like the first 10 minutes of Shutter Island when they're cruising into the island and going through all the security measures. There's like this horrible, almost like 1950s horror sounds with big trumpets and like screeching violins and stuff. Like it's very like almost like Martin Scorsese wants to make you insane before you even get into the insane asylum. Right. And this movie it's throughout. It doesn't let up. It is constant.
And what I love about that too is those noises you mentioned. Like at first when I was watching the movie, I was like, oh, that's a pretty interesting soundtrack. But then when they get on the island, you find out, oh, that's not the soundtrack. That's the noises coming from this lighthouse.
Yeah, there's like a constant foghorn in the back that is like it really wears down on your psyche as you're watching it, and you really sort of it pushes you to identify with the Robert Pattinson character, which that's the next thing we have to talk about is the amazing job that the two actors in this movie do.
Definitely.
Absolutely stunning, because they both went out of their way to learn very specific regional dialects and time period accurate dialects.
Right.
Robert Pattinson in this sounding like a pre-Civil War Yankee Northerner, almost at times a little glimmer of a New York sort of accent, but that was accurate for the time and the place. And Dafoe just sounding like
Captain Ahab.
Yeah, Captain Ahab more or less, but very, the way he talks is very, it's almost, I want to say rural, but in a like a boatman sort of way.
He's a stereotypical
sort of way.
He's a stereotypical captain that you always see whenever you like see a pirate character.
You almost
in, like,
expect him to have a peg leg and a
exactly.
and a
That's what
patch,
you
patch.
think of. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, and there was never a moment in the dialogue where I think that they slipped or anything like that. Like the accents, they were fully in character the entire time, and that doesn't just mean accents; it means everything. Mannerisms, Dafoe constantly gnawing on his corncob pipe, or Robert Pattinson. He just does a really great. Like, I feel like Robert Pattinson is really the unappreciated gem of this movie.
Yeah.
Like, if Willem Dafoe was the T-Rex of Jurassic Park, then Robert Pattinson is the Velociraptor. Exactly. He's the come from behind, because he spends the first half of the movie acting very annoyed, and it's just combined with the soundtrack and everything else that the director is doing to wear down on you, it really puts you in the same boat as him, gets you into an idea of what kind of headspace this character is in.
Right.
And then Dafoe is just like, I have nothing but praise for Dafoe in this movie. He goes from funny to terrifying in 1 second, and then back to funny. Like, it's just such a skill for an actor to be able to have, to just pull so many strings at once, and there's an interesting mentor-mentee relationship, mentor-apprentice relationship in this movie, which I think a lot of people can relate to. And the way that sort of, I mean, even though it's kind of old-timey and he sort of talks down to the younger guy in a way that you might not today, it's very gritty, and it's just done very well. It's done very well, I find.
Right.
The writing is excellent, because if you're anything like, if you want to get into the industry, or if you've done any kind of script writing, you'll listen to this dialogue and think, was it written that way, or like, did they improv a little bit? Because there are things that Dafoe says that you're like, I don't even know how I would spell that. Like, that was just a noise. Like, and then he's like, yeah, a beaut, yeah.
Exactly.
And I don't know. I just thought it was and at times these characters, they're bonding with each other 1 minute, and then, it starts off as a very cold relationship, and then they sort of bond a little bit, and then the main character starts opening up to drinking a little more, and then they get really friendly. Yeah. And then they are, and then they hate each other again. Like, the dynamic between two people, especially in a mentor-apprenticeship relationship, that you can have, is very well explored, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I one thing I think we should say, I should have said this before we started talking, for those who haven't seen the movie, the gist of it is you have the whole movie takes place on this, like, tiny island in a lighthouse, and like you said, Willem Dafoe is like the hardened, like, he's Captain Ahab guy, who's been there for years.
It's not clear if he was actually a captain of anything, but he just is sort of living reclusively.
He's the knowledgeable one.
He's the current lighthouse attendant,
and
he's training Robert Pattinson to be the new lighthouse attendant.
Right.
And Dafoe has sort of gone crazy in his isolation.
Exactly.
Yes.
But what I love about it is you keep on mentioning that throughout the whole first act of the movie, we pretty much stick solely with Robert Pattinson and how he's sort of taking in his surroundings and
going
all
with
these, like,
maintenance of the
exactly, like, listening to this guy say all of his, like, it's bad luck to not finish a toast, bad luck to kill a seagull. Like, you're sort of, like, absorbing, you're learning along with him. But then once we start to get into, like, the second act, and once things start to get crazy, we kind of almost get removed from it. We're sort of like watching the two of them rather than watching Willem Dafoe through the eyes of Robert Pattinson. You know what I mean? Like, once they both start to go crazy, we kind of step back and we're looking at this situation and we're saying, man, this is kind of fucked up. And it all just builds to, I guess we, like, spoiler free up till now, but spoilers, if you haven't seen The Lighthouse yet, you should go see it. Easily my favorite
Absolutely.
movie
I have
of the
nothing
year.
but praise for this movie. This is one of the most unique movies I've seen in years.
Yeah.
And I think it might have a specific audience. Maybe not. I mean, like I said before, it's kind of like Robert Pattinson saw one of these 1700s sea shanties memes and decided he wanted to make a movie where he could legitimately sing sea shanty memes.
Exactly.
He's like, what, you can get Willem Dafoe in here to do that too? Absolutely, get him in here. He's going to try his balls off to be like a genuine, accurate sea shanty singer. Like,
Exactly.
And they do sing sea shanties in this movie. It's brilliant. Anyway.
So then, yeah, going on to spoilers, the one thing like I really want to touch on, and I think this clip is available on YouTube if anyone's on the fence about watching this, but hands down, my favorite scene in that entire movie is when Robert Pattinson is drunk, and Willem Dafoe is maybe a little drunk but mostly sober.
Describe 50% of the movie so far.
they're sitting up in their like sleeping quarters. And I forget what happens right before it, but Robert Pattinson is like talking about how he misses being on mainland, and Willem Dafoe is kind of making fun of him. And there's this like just silent moment where they're just like sitting around, nothing's happening, and Willem Dafoe just goes, "What?" And Robert Pattinson looks up at him and is like, "What?" And they just back and forth. It's in the trailer. They start screaming at each other.
What?
Exactly.
They're barking it at each other at the same time, pretty much.
Someone told me they were like, that's meant to be a metaphor for the seagulls squawking at each other because
interesting.
Because Willem Dafoe says in seagulls are the souls of sailors,
and
that's why you don't kill them, is because it's bad luck. You've just damned a soul to hell. So they were saying that like you could equate the what to the sound of like a bunch of seagulls yelling at each other, which I didn't even think of. But
yeah,
that scene is the epitome of everything I love about that movie, like you said, because it's marketed as a horror movie, but it's really funny.
It is strangely funny,
and not like in a horror comedy, not like Get Out, where it's like you have moments of like you do have moments of release, but
and like levity. But this movie is funny, almost in a sadistic way.
Exactly. So like you'll have that moment where they're yelling at each other, what, and then that's followed up with it's like weird, but it's hilarious in its own right. And then you have Robert Pattinson being like, I want some real food. I'm tired of the food you cook. And then Willem Dafoe turns into this like sad little like puppy who's like, well, surely you like my lobster, don't you? And Robert Pattinson's just this drunk asshole who's like, no, I hate your lobster. And then just out of nowhere, Willem Dafoe stands up and goes on this like 4-minute long like
I was gonna talk
monologue.
about the exact same scene. I was gonna talk about the exact same scene.
I've never seen someone go from like
not
such
only is
a
it
sad
a monologue,
puppy.
it's a curse. He's like reading out a prayer of. He's like hopes that Poseidon comes in and rips his balls off or something, and drowns him, and corals growing off of him or something.
Right.
And like. Just leave his corpse for the crabs or some crazy. He just goes on for so long. I don't even think he blinked the entire time.
I watched it and he didn't.
The entire take was brilliant, and I think it was all in one take. And so it's just something that is brilliant. That Willem Dafoe is absolutely brilliant in that. And there's also some really hidden, really memorable insults in this movie.
Yes.
I think there's a part where it might be not too far after that scene where Robert Pattinson is drunk again, and he says something like, "You smell like curdled foreskin."
Yes.
Or something like that. That's brilliant. That is brilliant.
Yeah,
it is a great line.
There's a whole bunch of like, that's what makes me think that like none of this dialogue was improvised, because like how do you come up with that?
Yeah.
That had to have been written.
It had to have been, yeah. And whoever wrote it, they were like, turned to the other writer and gave him a high five. They're like, that is good, that is good.
Exactly. But yeah, that's the other thing that like the main thing that I love about that movie whenever I think about it is, like I said, it switches up from being very disturbing and very uncomfortable to having these moments of just hilarity.
Mm-hmm.
And that scene is the quintessential example, because you start off with like being kind of disturbed by how upset Robert Pattinson is getting over like that he hasn't had a steak in weeks. And then the next line is Willem Dafoe being like, "You don't like my cooking?" And like that makes you laugh your ass off. And then Willem Dafoe literally from one line to another goes from, "I've seen it, you're fond of my lobster, aren't you?" to "Let Neptune strike you dead." And it's like, and it's such like a quick switch, and it's terrifying, but it doesn't feel out of place. It like it somehow feels so natural, and I've never seen anything like that.
It's you've been put on this place with Robert Pattinson, who sort of it's like two things going around a whirlpool. It's just getting closer and closer with each pass.
Yeah.
And it's gotten to the point where this character that you are with, that you are training to become, you're training to get his job, so you're bound to become like him in many ways.
Yeah.
he's clearly off his rocker and just like not in any kind of reality that you yourself have been in, because he's insulted about silly things like his cooking, and he takes it so personally that he goes out of his way to instill a Poseidon or Neptune-based curse on him. Yeah. So this movie is in black and white, which is kind of an unusual choice for 2019. But I feel like it worked.
It did work. And one thing that you had mentioned before we started recording was the aspect ratio.
Yes, that too. This movie is almost practically square.
Yeah. And the reason why I did some reading about that, and the director had said that the movie takes place, for those who don't know, it's like 1890, I think, is the year that they provide as like when this all happens. Mm-hmm. Like 1890s New England, and the director had said something like he wanted to imitate how it would feel if you were watching like an old piece of film from the early 1900s, where everything is square and there's no color and it's just sort of drained. And I think the fact that it is black and white, because like, what color would you have to look at out in that scenario?
That's very true.
You have the ocean. You have
it's
always storming.
If that's an interesting point. If you were to have color anyway, your palette would only be grays, overcast day, sand, and ocean and seagulls, and like that's your whole color palette. The Lighthouse is white.
Exactly.
So you might as well just take all the color away, and then it allows you to do some very creative things with the lighting.
I think that's one of the reasons why it makes it so scary, is because that scene when Willem Dafoe is delivering this curse down on Robert Pattinson, the only light in the room is this like lantern.
The lantern on the table,
floor,
yeah.
And it's casting all these harsh shadows up at his face, and he looks like a monster when he's talking. With all you see is his like big scraggly beard, his like shiny bright teeth, and like his wide open eyes, and you're like,
he almost looks like a cawing baboon at some point.
Exactly.
Like, and that's interesting because I think that moment occurs probably a little bit past the halfway point in the movie.
Around there, yeah.
And then from there, it just gets like the whole point of their post becoming less and less human. Like by the end, they're like peeing on the floor and stuff. Like they just don't care anymore. I just thought the watching the de-evolution of that it's very well done.
One thing that I kind of want to get into a little bit of, and I wish I had more to say about this. I had some notes about it, but one thing that people like to, one theory that's been bouncing around is that none of what happened in this movie is real, and it's all a metaphor for what's going on inside the head of Robert Pattinson after he killed his former coworker. Because one thing that they say is that Willem Dafoe's character's name is Thomas. Yeah. And I forget what Robert Pattinson's name is, but he comes out as midway through the movie and he says, "This isn't my real name. I stole it from somebody. My name is actually Tom."
Yeah.
So it is like, okay,
that's started spouting theories about how that was maybe the same person.
Right. They could be the same person, or it's meant to be like Robert Pattinson. The character we see, Robert Pattinson, is his conscious mind trying to like move on and deal with the fact that he's killed this person and trying to like escape by literally removing himself from society. And Willem Dafoe is like the nagging part of his brain that is constantly bringing him down and being like, you know what you did, why'd you spill your beans? Like it is like trying to like make him realize what a terrible person he is. And that's where a lot of the conflict of like Robert Pattinson being like, I hate you, your cooking's terrible, you fart all the time, I hate living with you. Like it's a matter of like they're literally in the movie they're trapped together basically on this island, but if you're looking at it through that perspective, you're trapped in your own head and you can't run away from your subconscious that is telling you these things about yourself.
There's an interesting scene in that movie where he does bury him and then he comes back later to attack him again, and if you're working with that theory, that part is interesting because if that theory is true, then he's already done the burying. Right. And that's already done. And he found Robert Pattinson. There was also another scene where he finds a body part in the lobster cage. Remember that? Where he accuses Willem Dafoe's character of the one doing the murder. Yeah. So that would be interesting if he was actually the one who did the murder, and then he's actually like accusing him of that.
Exactly.
Doing like a reflection kind of thing, like you are what I see in myself, kind of thing. Right. There's just the other amazing thing about this movie is how much it does with just the setup of two people on an island, the lighthouse. Like the range of dynamic, like the relationships that these two go through, and the situations that you can have with that. It just amazes me that writers can actually that they can write something like that. The writing is amazing.
Yes.
Basically, it kept me guessing the whole time, definitely for sure. Like, from one moment to the next, I was like, I have no idea what could possibly happen. Are they going to get relieved? Is the supply ship going to show up in the middle of the storm? Are they both going to kill each other, and then the supply ship is going to show up and both of them are going to be dead?
Yeah.
Or, like, what's going to happen? Like, honestly, it was...
And that's one of the best, like talk about, like, being simplistic in a horror movie. That scene where they're supposed to be on that island for 4 weeks, and then the ship is going to come and relieve the two of them and put 2 new people on the island. That scene where they're like, okay, our time is up. They're waiting on the rock for the boat to show up all day. Like, it shows them in the morning, storm gets worse, and at nighttime no one's shown up. And then just cuts them back, like, having dinner, and Robert Pattinson, I think, just literally says they didn't show up. Like, that's such, like, it's so intense and horrific, and it's very simplistic in the way it does things. Like, through just little moments of, like, they didn't show up, or Willem Dafoe, like, just the little things he does where he's like, I'm the only one who's allowed to go upstairs
up to the actual lighthouse itself. The whole time he has swab it again, swab the deck again. Like, he really puts Pattinson through the ringer in terms of being an apprentice. He makes him do all the shit jobs, pretty much. And he gets the laid back. And he gets the lighthouse.
Yeah.
And, like, as he's training for that job, he's actually supposed to be doing the the main operating of the lighthouse itself, but Dafoe hoards it all to himself.
No, that's my job.
Yeah. And then at the end of the movie, Pattinson gets up there, and I'm not even sure if he was looking for enlightenment or if he found enlightenment. There's some kind of symbology with lighthouses and enlightenment. The lighthouse was in Annihilation as well. That was the focal point of the...
Yeah.
So there's something about lighthouses and surrealism.
It's like a beacon. It focuses your attention. Yeah, well,
it could mean many things. It could mean, that you're going to be home soon if you're a sailor.
Yeah.
It could mean or it could just mean light.
Exactly. And that's
sweet,
a good way.
Light.
That's a good way of watching this movie, is because you can look at it and treat it as a very, like, concrete. This is what it's all actually happening. This is Robert Pattinson is growing crazy. Willem Dafoe is already crazy, and he's mentally manipulating Robert Pattinson to go crazy. Like, there's the scene where Pattinson tries to get into a lifeboat and leave, and Dafoe, like, cuts it to bits with an axe. And then 10 seconds later, Defoe's like, man, what was up with that axe a second ago? Why'd you chop up the lifeboat? And, like, and then there's, like, a whole bunch of moments like that where Defoe is trying to make Robert Pattinson think he's the one.
They do try to play each other off for that, like that, yeah. So the most inexplicable thing about this movie is that if you watched it and had no idea what year it came out in, you might say, since it had Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe in it, you might say, oh, this came out in, like, 2006 or something like that. This is clearly like some kind of art house film. That my point is, you want to appreciate movies like this because they just don't get made anymore. Movies like this, you know what I mean?
Like, they're timeless.
Directors and writers are afraid of taking big, bold steps and really exploring human relationships and what really can be done with an hour and a half of film, when the possibilities are really limitless, and yet we choose to do almost the same thing every time with blockbuster hits, with the quips and same color palettes every time, 5 Transformers movies in a row, what have you.
Right.
You just don't see movies like this anymore, and you want to reward that, because I think it's a very rewarding experience to watch it. You'll laugh, you'll be wondering what's going to happen, you might cry, you might be questioning your own sanity by the end of it. I know I was, but I overall very much did enjoy The Lighthouse. Thank you for the recommendation.
Of course,
I really did like it.
It's easily my favorite movie of the year, and I'm really glad that it's been getting the attention it's been getting. Because, like you said, there's movies just like this just don't get made anymore.
Absolutely not.
I say it all the time when people are like, man, why people keep on making emoji movies? It's like, well, every time you buy a ticket, you're voting with your wallet. You're telling that studio, I want to see more of this. So I think that the fact that a movie like this is getting as much exposure as it is only helpful to the industry. It's gonna encourage more people to take risks. It's gonna encourage studios to fund more risky ideas, and it's only gonna make things more interesting down the line, movie-wise.
I agree. I think it's a great thing that lots of people are talking about this movie and getting the ball rolling and getting their friends to see it, because it is not, like I said, it's not a traditional movie. It is everything's out of left field, and it's very rewarding for a viewer to stick with it and go through and watch the whole thing. I know you might get off-put by the black and white, but I know after 10 minutes I didn't even notice it. I mean, I've watched lots of black and white movies. movies, but
Yeah.
after 10 minutes, you don't even notice it. You're so absorbed in the atmosphere that it creates and the plot and the situation and the characters.
Right.
That you don't even need color. You don't even need a full aspect ratio.
Exactly.
Which, framing this movie, that's a whole other thing. With a whole different aspect ratio, framing this movie must have been completely different. Like, you know what I mean? With almost I think the ratio is like 1 to 19 to 1 or something like that.
Exactly.
It's almost a
perfect square.
Yeah. And that's what they used to do. You know, that's how cameras originally started. So
yeah,
it has a very, very good effect.
Definitely, yeah. It definitely puts you like subconsciously back in that time period.
Yeah, along with their the amazing performances, definitely. The Lighthouse.
If Willem Dafoe doesn't get an Oscar for this movie, I would be very sad.
Has he ever won an Oscar?
He was nominated last year. He was in a movie where he played Van Gogh, the guy who cuts off his ear.
Really?
Yeah, he was nominated.
I gotta see that.
He did. I saw clips of it, and it didn't look that great. But I mean, yeah, he's very talented. I think that
I think he is very
he should
talented.
Definitely get a.
I think so too.
At least a nomination
for this, because sometimes they'll send him the wrong message if you give it to him a year late. Like if it was this performance that's really remembered, but then you give it to him for something next year. As the actor, it sends all sorts
Which
of
that
mixed
happens
messages.
a lot too.
Yeah.
With especially with the Oscars, like DiCaprio doing a really amazing performance in Wolf of Wall Street, and then a year or two later getting one for The Revenant. It almost feels like okay, we'll give you one since you've been nominated this many times.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. We're not going to reward
the exact movie that you just kind of almost deserve it for.
Right. But one thing that I just realized as we were talking, this is sort of like a weird mental gymnastics way to segue to our next point. But we mentioned Robert Pattinson and how he's sort of made a comeback in from his Twilight days. He was in a movie a few years ago, which if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's on Amazon Prime, called Good Time.
I haven't seen it.
It's sort of like a crime movie. He's the star of it, but it is directed by the Safdie Brothers, who made the movie that you recommended to me, Uncut Gems.
Uncut Gems, yes, absolutely. So, what was that? What was the year that Good Time came out?
Good Time, I think, was 2017.
2017.
I think so. Yeah.
Yes. So, Safdie Brothers and Uncut Gems. So this movie kind of was like, it sort of became a social media phenomenon in and of itself, just because Adam Sandler is known to have joked that if he doesn't get some kind of nomination or win an award for this one, that he'll just go back to making
Jack and Jill 3
pixel quality movies for the rest of his career, just to spite us.
Exactly.
Which kind of, to me, proves that he's been making these movies up to this point to kind of spite us. Like,
right.
What's the one with him and Drew Barrymore where it's pretty much they just go on vacation?
50 First Dates.
No,
there
was one later on, Blended.
Blended, yeah.
Yeah, where they just go on vacation, or Grown Ups 2.
Yeah.
It's just Sandler and his friends going on vacation, and they happen to make a movie in their off time, sort of thing. Or at least that's what it seems like, and that's what it feels like while you're watching it.
It annoys me because he has proven that he is a good actor with the right script and the right direction. And that's definitely a very clear case with this movie, is that he was having a lot of fun and he had a very clear idea of what he was expected to do. And the directors obviously had proven themselves with Good Time. So they know what they're doing. So they took someone who is very skilled when he's working with a very good blueprint, and they gave him a very, very excellent blueprint to work with. So for those who haven't seen Good Time, it's sort of Adam Sandler plays this jewelry...
Uncut Gems, you mean?
Yeah, Uncut Gems, yeah. He what did I say?
You said Good Time.
Good Time, sorry. Yeah, Uncut Gems.
It is a good time.
It is a good time, yeah. But Adam Sandler plays a sort of a owner of like a jewelry pawn shop.
New York City sort of jewel hustler.
Yeah.
From the like Diamond District.
Yeah.
He sells these really exotic pieces that are too gaudy for any real chain enthusiast or diamond enthusiast to wear. The Furby, and Michael Jackson on the cross.
Right.
So he's kind of just like a hustler in his own way. Like, you get the sense that he might have gotten lucky once before in his career. Yeah. And that sort of propelled him up to where his status is now, and he's just been hustling ever since.
Yeah, but he doesn't have a great success rate, as we've seen with this movie. He kind of makes a lot of bad decisions. And
so before I go on a rant about it, I wanted to know what you thought of it.
I liked it a lot. I really, coming off of Good Time, I was excited to see what they would make, and I would call this pretty much on par with Good Time. It was very, very well made, very well shot. The sound design and the direction was very great, because you have a lot of scenes where there's a lot of people talking over each other and yelling at each other, and you can still you can tell it's chaotic, but you still get the gist of what's happening.
I was going to make that point too. Yeah, the dialogue is so naturalistic. It occurs like in reality. Like there might be 5 people in a room, they're all talking to each other, but the 2 guys who you are most occupied on who the scene are about, maybe Adam Sandler and like Kevin Garnett, the basketball player, is in this movie.
Right.
And even he, he's a basketball player, but he did a great job as far as I was concerned with the acting. Like he fulfilled the part completely, even though he was playing himself. He did a great job and interacted with Sandler well.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's almost like Spielberg likes to do this too. It's almost like a parallel dialogue technique where there's a couple of different conversations going on at the same time. But if you're watching the movie, you still what you're paying attention to, it gets resolved.
You can pick out the important bits. And it's not
the message gets across very well.
Yeah.
In a very realistic way, and the whole the dialogue in the whole movie is like that.
Yeah.
It's brilliantly done.
It's very. He also does a really great job of playing. It's sort of going back to the unlikable lead character trope. He's very unlikable and very scummy, and he does a lot of things that you're like, come on, dude, why are you doing that? But like at the same time, you're rooting for him. You want to see him get that opal back and pay off his debts, and you want to see him spend time with his family, and it just is like bad situation after bad situation after bad situation.
Right. It is definitely, the movie is definitely a portrait of a character who is not necessarily good by traditional standards, and I would even argue he's not a good person.
Right.
So I think it must have been like Tony Soprano or something like this, or maybe Walter White from Breaking Bad was a continuation of it, where the anti-hero main character trope is really becoming like a popular choice, and the movies like this kind of take it to like see how far you are willing to like almost root for this guy. And even by the end of the movie, even though he's done terrible things, you still kind of root for him in the end. I mean, I guess that might be the power of Adam Sandler or the power of his performance.
Yes.
Because if you go back and watch the kind of movies that Adam Sandler used to make, they're obviously comedies. They might be kind of low effort or low brow.
I'd say most of them are pretty low effort.
Well, yeah. Well, but you always had Sandler being sort of like the wise guy, sort of like making snide remarks, offhand comments, and like he wasn't really good at being like. He was almost more like Mike Myers than like any kind of like real like. I guess Mike Myers is leading man too, but in Uncut Gems, Adam Sandler plays that same kind of snarky kind of character, but it's like from a different direction almost, because he's that guy. But he's that guy because of all these experiences that this character goes through that turns him into sort of like a vile character.
Right. The one thing I just thought of now was I mentioned that he is playing a very unlikable person that you still subconsciously root for, and I think that that's kind of a good flip from his previous movies, because one problem that I always have whenever I watch like an Adam Sandler comedy, aside from like the humor being like a lot of time low effort, is that he comes across as a very unlikable, kind of like insufferable character, but the movie is telling you, no, you should like him. He's the good guy. You like him, right? He's funny. You identify with him, right? And like, but he will make choices and do things that you're like, wow, that's kind of a
right. It almost tests how far you would be willing to root for him, and then
But what I find funny is that in those movies, you're like, the movie's telling you, no, root for him, and you're like, no, I don't want to root for him. He's doing awful things. But whereas in this movie, it's like, yeah, he's doing awful things, but he's your lead.
But root for him.
But root for him. Yeah. And you're like, oh well.
It's almost the exact opposite. In a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I thought it was a very interesting dynamic. A real major theme in this movie is not gambling necessarily, but betting, in almost an existential sense, because he bets on, not only does he bet on sports, and he bets all the money that he has on things, like thinking that he's going to have a big win. Like there's a part in the movie where he steals a ring from somebody and then pawns it, and then uses all that money to place a bet on him, even though he told that character he would return that ring to him later on. Yeah. He just did it because he's just a hustler, and he just needed that cash at that time, at that moment. And there's an important scene later on where he's talking to his wife, who we as viewers know that he's actively cheating on.
Yeah.
And he tells her, come on, you want to make it to Christmas? You want to make it past like those Kanye West lyrics?
Yeah.
Hey, we made it to Thanksgiving. Maybe we can make it to Christmas.
Right.
Well, like he's like, the whole movie there, it's already assumed that they're gonna get a divorce as soon as the kids are old enough or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then Adam Sandler's character comes up to his wife and they have a moment together, and he's like, do you still want to get divorced? I mean, come on. I mean, I don't think things are so bad. Like, to me, that was that character. Because this is what this character does. He judges things based on everything. And what he's doing by telling his wife that he's placing a bet that he can continue this charade of cheating on his wife and having the life that he has right now.
Yeah.
That's the bet that he places. Instead, you know what I mean? And that's how it is, kind of in an existential way. He is fighting the flow of the universe at almost every turn. Like, his wife wants to leave him, but he wants to double down on that and bet that, we can make this work. We can stay together. Like. Yeah. And it's entirely out of selfish motivations, you know.
Exactly.
But
all of his motivations are very selfish.
And in the end of the movie, he makes a bet. He wagers that he can hold the goons there for a certain amount of time, and of course that bet doesn't hit, as you'd say.
Yeah. So was talk about things that you're not expecting when you watch a movie. I didn't think that was going to happen.
Yeah. Well, that talk about I feel like that might have been the only way. You know what's funny? That ending is what the character deserved, I would argue, but it left, as the viewer, it left you kind of unsatisfied, because it's almost the opposite of what we talked about with The Wolf of Wall Street.
Right.
The ending is in The Wolf of Wall Street, the ending feels kind of unfulfilled because the bad guy got away, but in this movie, or the good guy who is the bad guy got away, but scot-free. But in this movie, he doesn't get away. He sort of gets his comeuppance, even if it's from another hustler.
Right. But you don't want to see it happen.
And it's what he deserved, but you almost don't want to see it happen. Yeah. It's a weird opposite sort of situation, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah.
It was very well done movie. Like, you're talking about the sound design and everything.
Yeah.
Sound design was very well. The soundtrack is, it sort of places it on an existential level. Like, one moment you're floating through space.
Right.
There's like gas clouds floating by you and stars, and the next minute you're going through Adam Sandler's character's colon as an intro to the character.
Yeah.
It's a very cheeky.
It's like an interesting way to introduce him to.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
It's like, it's literally, hey, this guy is an asshole.
Yeah,
like,
exactly. It's literally exactly. Yeah. That's the kind of things that are so different, and yet it sends such a such a strong message.
Right.
It's right on target. It's right on point. That's the kind of thing I've never seen anything like that for an intro for a character in a movie.
Exactly.
Like, that's pretty amazing.
And I love how it boils down to is, like, you have that first 10 minutes of, like, we're in Ethiopia and we're watching what happens, like, to get these gems.
Yeah, to get the gem
that this
sets
guy
the whole thing
covets so much. And then we almost don't even talk about that first 10 minutes afterwards, because it's like all this hard work just so this one sleazy asshole
in New York City
can pawn it off and make money to make a bet at a game and then lose all of it.
Yeah, to make money that he probably won't be able to hang on to for too long.
So it's almost like this Ethiopian guy who just broke his bone out of his leg and is never going to be able to work in this mine again. That sacrifice doesn't even matter, because Adam Sandler is just going to lose that money in a bet.
Yeah.
An hour later anyway.
Yeah.
So it's like,
that's an interesting first world, third world sort of consequence dynamic there.
Yeah. That
I think is never talked about, and that might just scratch the surface, but that's how the whole plot is kicked into motion. So
exactly,
it draws a lot of attention to it. It's very interesting.
The one thing I was going to mention too about this with the sound design, the lighting too was wonderful.
Yeah,
like those were the two aspects, other than Adam Sandler's performance, where I think the movie excelled very well. Like, everything felt very natural. Like, when he's in his...
Half the time you're in the diamond store, yeah.
Yeah, when he's in the diamond store, you can tell everything's, like, blue, fluorescent lighting, and it's very, like, kind of cold a little bit. And then when he goes in the club and you have all the crazy lights and stuff going off, like, there's never a moment where you don't believe that you're in the setting that you're in. Mm-hmm. Like, one gripe that I have with a lot of movies is that when you have a scene that's in, like, a club or a bar, you'll have two people talking at, like, the volume that we're talking, while people are, like, screaming and yelling and dancing, and there's loud music going on all around you, and that's just, like, that's not how it happens. We would be, like, leaning in close and, like, shouting to hear each other.
Yeah,
and that so often movies don't really do that. Like, the only other time I can think of off the top of my head where that doesn't happen is, like, Social Network, when they're in that club and he's like, $1 billion is what's really cool. But
right.
Like, every single time they're in a club, or, like, they're on the streets, or they're, like, or if they're in a car, the lighting is always very, like, natural to that moment. It never feels like they're not in any of those settings. And when they do go into, like, a club or in, like, a setting where there's, like, a whole bunch of people yelling over each other, you have the actors yelling over the background noise. It's never like, hey, so how was your day? As you hear like, and so I love that. Whenever a filmmaker focuses on little details like that they didn't have to notice, because, like, let's be honest, nobody really cares about the problem that I just had. Like, that's not going to detract from a movie for most people. But when you have filmmakers who are like, they go the extra mile to make this
those little details
feel more realistic, then it's like, okay, this is a director who has my best interests at heart and is thinking about me and thinking about things that maybe most people aren't considering.
Right.
And if it's a problem that it doesn't bother you, then it could even make you think about that. You could be like, oh, well, why do people always talk at normal volume in clubs and movies? So it's like...
That's kind of silly that they even do that. Yeah,
exactly. So it's there's just so many little details about that movie that you can tell there was so much care and focus put into it that, like, it makes you appreciate the final product more, because they didn't have to consider a lot of those things, but they did.
Yeah, so, definitely.
Yeah.
There's a lot in this movie like that. There's not only the lighting, but there's a lot that makes it very visually appealing. Yes, the lighting, but also the way that it's framed. There's a lot of close-ups to characters' faces in this movie where you see their initial reactions to things immediately, and it really puts things on that razor's edge. You know, it makes you wonder how is this character going to react now? Like, what's going to happen next? The other thing I was going to say about it was that Sandler, it's really best if you keep Sandler out of the concept room. Like, you know, at this point, everybody knows Sandler's strengths. It's being a wise ass, making smart remarks, and sort of acting like a little bit of a weasel, which is why this character is perfect for him.
Right.
You almost need a writer who knows what to do with, like, you need to know what you have, and you need to know what to do with him.
Right.
So, the movie that I will draw closer parallels to Uncut Gems would be Bad Lieutenant, Port of Call, New Orleans, with Nicolas Cage. Nicolas Cage plays a detective, but he's very much on both sides of the law. He's a very crooked cop, and it shows a lot in common with this movie because it's very high stakes. The character is a degenerate gambler who puts a lot of stuff on the line for him and his girlfriend. Well, at the same time, he's cheating on his girlfriend. And, like, you just are put into this, you're put into the shoes of this character whose life is just a complete circus, that he's just struggling to juggle everything.
Right.
Even in Bad Lieutenant, there are, there's, like, a strangely similar vibe with Uncut Gems, where they both sort of interfere with sports in a way to get their own way. In Bad Lieutenant, since the movie takes place in New Orleans, he interferes with the Saints.
Yeah.
He blackmails one of the linebackers or something like that. And in this movie, it's Kevin Garnett, who believes he draws power from this gem that they unearthed.
Yeah.
And he has a better game because of it. And then when Adam Sandler gets it back, he has a lackluster game, and the character comes back for it and he says, I want that gem, I want that stone. And meanwhile, Adam Sandler's character is placing bets on that game the whole time, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you just really get a sense that you are in a train where the conductor just can make turns at any time.
Exactly, yeah.
Like, when as a viewer watching the movie like this with characters like that, it sort of gives you a out-of-control sort of feeling. And it's a good thing because it keeps you engaged, keeps you watching. You have no idea where else it can go from there. Also, if no other reason, you have to watch this movie because Adam Sandler and The Weeknd get into a fist fight.
Exactly.
And that is what I'm surprised didn't get on social media. Like, you've got a movie with Kevin Garnett, the star basketball player, and The Weeknd, and Adam Sandler
punches the
Weeknd and Adam Sandler getting into a fight is so, like, that's
like a sentence you would never even think.
Yeah, that's a cultural touchstone waiting to happen.
Yeah.
Like, Adam Sandler is just out to fight Bob Barker and The Weeknd. He's just out to fight people.
Exactly.
And I love it. And I love it. So what I found about Uncut Gems is, I guess I sort of spoiled it for myself a little bit by going and reading some critics' reviews before I went to go see the actual movie, which you're supposed to be able to do. You're supposed to be able to look at a critic's review and then go in there and not have your brain already burst.
Yeah.
But that's sort of what happened because I read a lot that this movie is like balls to the wall tension and you can't look away from the screen and it's I'm curious.
Not really.
Did you find it that way?
No, I was like, okay, he needs to get this stone back, and I kept on waiting for the next scene where someone was going to beat him up, but I was never like on the edge of my seat. I feel like, and that's leads to kind of like an overarching problem with the company that distributed Uncut Gems, A24. I feel like
Who also did the Lighthouse.
They also did the Lighthouse, yeah, but they make really, they fund and release really great movies. They have a very good track record, I think, but they have a problem, not all the time, but sometimes they have a problem with how to market their movies to people. Like you said, with like, it's balls to the wall action, and then when you watch it, it's more like, okay, we're watching Adam Sandler kind of meander around New York trying to get this diamond back. I
didn't think. Let me clarify. I didn't think it was boring by any stretch.
Yeah,
it definitely held my attention.
It's not this like.
But it's not super suspenseful. Like, that's why I bring in Bad Lieutenant, because I feel like there was more stakes in that movie than, like, if you wanted the kind of experience you would get watching this movie,
right?
And you wanted something slightly better, slightly more cranked up in terms of tension, I would say Bad Lieutenant.
Yeah, because the whole time you're like waiting for him to get caught.
Yeah, exactly.
And in this scenario, this is a kind of a movie where you know that Adam Sandler is going to get caught repeatedly again and again and again before the end of the movie. You're just waiting for those scenes to happen. Yeah. Which, again, is not to say that it's bad. It's just that that's what you're expecting.
The tension in this movie, it does an interesting thing, whereas in some other movies like Bad Lieutenant and others, the tension is slowly mounting from the beginning until there's a climax point where everything just sort of blows up. This movie, the tension rises and falls and sort of ebbs and flows and almost as needed in terms of the story, so it's totally welcome and it works. But it wasn't the anxiety fest that I was led to believe by the critics. Yeah. Even though that did technically get my butt in the seat, it's not super high stakes the whole time. Although there is some very teeth chattering, intense moments in the movie. Yeah. But it shares it with moments of levity, moments where he's at home with his family for the holidays almost. I feel like that whole scene was just sort of to give the audience a breath of fresh air a little bit.
Exactly, yeah.
But as I was watching it, I couldn't help but feel like the tension could have been controlled, tapped, and cranked up a little bit more when need be. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that was one problem I definitely had with it, but I didn't feel like I had that same problem with Bad Lieutenant. And also to sort of cross the streams a little bit, because one thing that we kind of wanted to do was
Thank you, Egon. Very important safety tip. Thank you.
One thing that we kind of wanted to do was like have a newer movie we recommend, but also have like here's a reference point to tie it in. So technically, we're each recommending each other 2 movies per episode. Yours was Uncut Gems, Bad Lieutenant. Mine was Lighthouse, and then the director's first movie, The Witch. Just for sake of clarity for those listening. But with Bad Lieutenant, that tension was definitely there, but also again to sort of like cross the recommendations a little bit. That was also another movie that I think did comedy and drama very well. Like, you have these moments where it's like he's about to go on a drug bust, and then what the hell are these iguanas doing on this coffee table?
Yes.
Or they just murdered 3 people in cold blood, and it's like his soul is still breakdancing.
And he's like holding a revolver up to an old lady. Give me a medication or whatever. I forget what this is about.
Yeah. That's a complete tangent, though. But yeah, so Uncut Gems, I really, really liked. I would almost say it's almost cliched in a way, but it's not. Like, we've seen
Uncut Gems?
Yeah, we've seen this type of movie before where it's like you have a sleazy guy who's just hustling and trying to get by, and he just can't get that lucky break. But it's unique in the fact of like the way it's presented with like the wonderful sound design and the lighting and the way it's shot and
the
writing and Adam Sandler's performance. So I think that is what really what
sets it apart.
Yeah, I think Uncut Gems is definitely I would call it one of the best of the year.
I would say so too. Yeah, we might criticize it harshly, but I definitely want to see more movies like Uncut Gems, especially ones that may reignite the career of an actor that we may have forgotten about. Right. Because Adam Sandler did get lost in the sauce for a little bit there.
He was like the one good movie was like Punch Drunk Love.
Yeah, and now I think it was another serious role for him.
So I think that now we're gonna have it's gonna be Uncut Gems and Punch Drunk Love is like his 2 things where he did a couple other serious movies, but I think those 2 are like the big like what makes him stand out as an actor. Yeah, who is capable of more than just like.
Watch, he's gonna be in a Scorsese film next or something, playing a Jewish gangster or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wouldn't surprise me.
But yeah, so I guess those are that's our discussion on Uncut Gems and
Did you want to talk
the
about
Lighthouse. We
the
could,
Witch?
yeah, a little bit. I didn't really have many points. It was just...
I haven't seen The Witch, but you're drawing parallels between that and The Lighthouse.
Yeah, the main parallels is that The Witch is a very claustrophobic setting. I would argue that The Lighthouse is even more claustrophobic, but The Witch is another period piece horror movie set in, like, 1600s America in, like, a Puritan village, like, little colony, where everyone is... like all about Jesus and God, and like that's what drives everything. And you have a family of it's a mother, a father, a teenage girl, like a 9 or 10-year-old boy, 2 twins who are maybe like 5 or 6, and then a newborn baby. And the father, I forget what he does, but he does something that gets them removed from the community due to like religious reasons. So they're sort of cast out and forced to fend for themselves basically in the American wilderness.
Right.
So they build this little cabin that's out in the woods, and they're trying to make it. And there's a witch that lives in the woods that is attacking them and haunting them, but she only ever really appears to the children. And because we're in this period of adults believing anything wrong that anyone does is witchcraft, you have this dynamic of the parents kind of turning on the kids and thinking that the kids are the cause of the problem. It's very good, and it sort of goes with like a lot of the same things I said about The Lighthouse, with it being like a period piece. You kind of need subtitles to understand what's being said in The Witch, because it's all Old English. You can get the gist of it, but like if you want to know what's actually being said, I would recommend watching it with subtitles. But yeah, a lot of parallels, because it is a period horror. It's a very claustrophobic movie, because it's just this one family in this cabin in like a little clearing, and they're all just surrounded by woods, and that's it. So I think what kicks it off is the baby goes missing, and then the teenage daughter is sort of blamed for what happened, and she's kind of starts to go crazy a little bit. Everyone has their own sort of encounter with the witch, and do you want me to spoil the end for you, or do you want to go back and watch it at some point?
I will check it out at some point.
Okay, so yeah,
spoil it for me.
I won't spoil it, but then it's so the main parallel I wanted to draw was that this director really likes working within a period, and a lot of his ideas seem to be this like claustrophobic, where you're all alone sense of horror, and I think that he does a very good job with that. The Witch was kind of like you can watch it and be like, that has good parts, not my cup of tea. I think that if you can appreciate a good movie, you'll be able to watch The Lighthouse and be like, no, that's fantastic. But you might be a bit more on the fence with The Witch. It does some interesting things, but I could see how it could leave someone unsatisfied, because I was a little bit unsatisfied with the way it ended. But that's not to say that there aren't scenes in the movie that are very intense and very, very well done. But those were kind of mainly the parallels I wanted to draw, is that I think that this director is very good at working within this sort of genre. And he said in an interview, I don't remember who it was with, but he knows that his next movie is going to be a period piece, just because he loves researching like old dialect and like making everything historically accurate to the T, but he doesn't know that his next movie will be a horror film. So that'll
he said it doesn't know, or he doesn't know?
He doesn't know if he'll make a horror movie next. He might try
I'd be
something
interested to
else.
see if he does another period piece.
Yeah, I think it's very safe to say that he will, but I don't
mind that. I don't mind that at all, because you want to use your power as a storyteller to take the audience to different places in time and space.
Exactly.
That's even better. A little more variety.
And who else is doing period pieces that are as accurate as what he's doing?
Yeah, I don't know.
Like you'll have you could have like an 1800s war movie, but everyone talks like how we talk now.
Yeah, something's missing. Something's not right.
It really immerses you in that time, and it kind of like, in another way, it's mainly like kind of in a weird subconscious way, it kind of makes things even more horrific, because it makes you feel so removed from what's happening that it makes you, like, when these characters do start to go crazy and they do start to do terrible things, it makes you identify with them less. And then I think when you identify with somebody less in that way, it makes them seem more horrific. It makes you more scared. of
but
what
in
they're
the same
capable
way,
of doing.
for the past, however long how you've been watching the movie for that point, you've also been in the period piece, so you're feeling a little stranded out of time.
Yeah.
And it sort of lends that, in with the characters.
It makes you uncomfortable.
It makes, yeah.
You're Robert Pattinson, you've never been in a lighthouse before. You're this teenage girl, and you've never had to live in a cabin in the woods with no resources at all.
Yeah.
It's very... It removes you from the scenario, but at the same time it puts you into it in a very unique way, I think.
I agree.
And on that note, we've been going for almost 2 hours and 15 minutes. So
I said that's pretty damn impressive.
Yeah, for a first episode, that's pretty crazy. I don't know what'll make the cut and what won't, but
might have to rearrange some things.
We'll figure it out. So yeah, this was the first episode of the Watchlist Podcast. Thank you guys so much for tuning in.
Thank you for joining us.
We hope that you'll tune into the next episode. Which, speaking of which, we have to give out our recommendations. So if anyone is listening and you would like to be in on the conversation for the next episode, then feel free to hunt down either of the movies that we'll be recommending and watch them at your leisure, so that way you can form your own opinions about what we'll be saying.
And then you can see who you agree with more.
Exactly. You might watch The Lighthouse and say, man, Jacob and Devon sure are crazy. This is pretentious garbage. Why would I like this? Or, man, Adam Sandler hasn't made a good movie in a long time, has he? So my recommendations for you for next week's episode, I think that jumping on the A24 bandwagon, another great movie that came out this past year, another good horror movie that came out this past year that's been a little controversial, not as well received as The Lighthouse. I want to get your opinions on it.
Okay.
Midsommar by Ari Aster. It's his second feature film, his first being Hereditary in 2017, I think, which is another great movie, but we'll save that recommendation for another day if you haven't seen it. So Midsommar by Ari Aster came out in 2018.
Right.
And some parallels I'll be drawing from it in our discussion of Midsommar will be, I don't remember the year it came out, but the Nicolas Cage remake of The Wicker Man.
Oh boy.
I don't remember who made that, but again, so we have a pretty good juxtaposition here.
Doing it for internet points.
Exactly.
Okay.
Internet points.
Not the bees!
Not the bees!
Not the bees! Oh, careful my eyes!
So yeah, those are my two recommendations to you. So
have you already seen Midsommar?
I've seen both of them.
Okay,
yeah.
Excellent. So we'll know. So my recommendation for you is going to be Scorsese's The Irishman, which came out this year.
Okay, still haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, well, neither have I. So we're both going to watch it.
Fascinating.
And then by the time I've watched it, I'll be able to give you a second recommendation where I can draw a bunch of parallels between that movie and something that has come before.
Okay.
Might be another one of Scorsese's works, might not be. I have to watch it and see what movie really sort of lines up and matches, and where I feel like either he drew inspiration from or what it harkens to.
Fair enough.
You know what I mean?
So, I guess whenever Devon lets me know what his other movie will be, I'll just put it in the description of this video. So, for now, if you want to be in on the conversation, then check out Midsommar, The Wicker Man, the Nicolas Cage remake, not the 1970s movie, and The Irishman. I'm pretty sure the Irishman's on Netflix, correct?
I believe it was released on Netflix.
I think Midsommar you might be able to find on Prime. I'm not sure. And The Wicker Man, I don't know. That might be a little bit trickier to track down. But yeah, those are our recommendations for next episode. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will catch you next time on the Watchlist Podcast.
See ya.